Hello, and welcome back after something of a sabbatical to Legend of the GLORIO Heroes, your premier recap and reactions podcast about the legendary 1988 science fiction OVA. It's been a couple months since we all finished Legend of the Galactic Heroes, but life goes on. Just like Legend of the Galactic Heroes.
The legend ended and history began.
Indeed. Some of us have moved across the universe. Others of us have climbed the ladder of power. And some of us are still here.
Under the yoke of a broken democracy.
Indeed. The voice you just heard is with me, as always, my stalwart co-host and traveling companion, Iro.
I'm still here. I'm not dead yet.
Indeed. And sometimes that's the best you can do in the world we live in. Because related to that, along with us, the living embodiment of the Yang school of corporate promotion, by which I mean outliving all your superiors, is Gel.
That doesn't bode well for me in the final episode now, though, does it?
I'd say less the final episode and maybe more the third season. I'd start.
Yeah.
Better make sure you're.
Is this going to be one of those serious episodes where we just cold open with no OP?
Oh, that's never a good sign.
Yeah.
And finally, with us across the ocean of stars, that is the regular ocean, is Marlon.
Everything is locked down. The
Right.
coronavirus is going to kill me by the end of this episode, probably.
Some things have changed in the months since our last podcast, including the unfortunate spread of the old COVID-19. Marlon, I've read some news. It seems like Italy is having something of a time with.
I mean, it is playing into the Italian love of drama. So, I mean, I can't tell how much of this is real and how much of this is just the government version of them throwing their hands up and talking very loudly.
Were there any? I forget. Were there any references to pandemics in Legend of the Galactic Heroes?
You know, the funny thing is, I think, like, for a show that is so nuanced and covers so many very real world topics, I think pandemics is not heavily explored in Legend of the Galactic Heroes. At least,
I mean, they kind of live in a world where you could just leave the planet, though, right?
Yeah.
So-
right? And I suppose they live in a world where they got magic sleep beds. I'm sure.
Right.
I don't know. I think maybe in their world, vaccine denialism is a truly well and dead topic
I hope
by
so.
the enlightened age of Legend of the Galactic Heroes.
Yeah.
But anyways, we don't want to get too off topic here, even if in many ways
Immediately
Legend of the
dating this podcast.
Yes. Even if Legend of the Galactic Heroes is a show that perhaps allows and encourages off-topic discussion, but we're here to, in a sense, cap off our time with the legendary show that changed our lives over a year ago. And,
Yeah.
That's not to say that this is the end, but in some ways, this is the end of our time with Legend of both the GLORIO Heroes and the Galactic Heroes. We wanted an excuse to talk about it, this show one last time, go over all the notes, litigate all the points, talk all the talking pieces, leave it all out in the field, so to speak. I think that, that doesn't mean we're all gonna take our turns and give our thesis on Legend of the Galactic Heroes here. Though if anybody does, I will not stop them. But it's more. This is not a show. This is a show that aired decades ago. And it is not a show we're gonna talk about often in our podcast, except for when D&T shows up every few seasons. In our regular podcast, the GLORIO Chat, I mean, and so.
Right.
For better or worse, this is at least for now, this is kind of it for us in our time with Legend of the Galactic Heroes. So,
Until you guys do Gaiden.
Yes, until we do Gaiden. Yeah, of course. That is always, we're gonna keep saying
That's always
that.
the threat.
Yes, that we will. The threat that looms, we will threaten the world with a Gaiten podcast. That is the gun we hold to the head of the listening world. But for now, though, this is it for us. So, with all that kind of taken care of, we should just try to get into this. We kind of put together a few talking points, a couple of notes, mainly Iro doing the work here, but to kind of get the ball rolling on discussion. So the first topic we have here, related to something I just mentioned, is related to Legend of the Galactic Heroes. Is there anything meaningful that we want to say about DNT, the modern TV anime adaptation of the story, or have we covered that enough in the main podcast?
I genuinely don't remember how in depth we went on DNT in the main podcast.
Well, we didn't finish talking about it.
Oh,
Right.
we get blindsided by the end of season?
Yes.
End
I
of year?
believe we never actually talked about the end of DNT.
We kind of jumped in because I jumped in to watch the Ovalister fight because I wanted to see the mechs.
Yeah,
I wanted to know
actually, it was the same for me.
And I wanted to know the context of Sunglasses Yang.
God, right.
God.
So I started watching around there, and I got to admit, after another episode or two, I dropped off again because I was just not. I do not.
Not for you. Huh?
I do not enjoy D&T after watching the original.
Understandable.
There's something to be said about, I think, the style that the original Legend of the Galactic Heroes was made in, that just kind of seems more timeless than the like pretty boy, you know, kind of style that they drew all the new D&T characters in.
It feels like there's more, and we've probably said this before, but the original series feels like it has more personality and like warmth and character to it, whereas D&T feels much more like a, I don't know, kind of, it feels more like, I mean, the story is good, but like the way it looks and feels and sounds and everything feels more like a generic anime than like something unique, I guess.
Right. I mean, I think those are definitely valid opinions to have about DNT. I mean, I think even Iro and I, DNT's most ardent defenders here, will agree that it is, compared to the original OVA, it is an imperfect adaptation. But, you know, I think that, like, in many ways, we watch it because it is
more Legend of the Galactic Heroes.
Yes, right. It is more chances for us to spend with those characters.
I mean, I'm like on the surface level interested to see how they adapt it, because of course the OVA is not a perfect adaptation of the novels,
right?
So there's room for and I mean there's also like the 2 manga adaptations, right? So like there's been other interpretations that kind of spin things a little bit differently.
Yeah. And
so it's that interests me on a surface level, but enough to like sit through a half an hour every week of, you know, something I'm not really enjoying just to find those details has not been enough for me
totally
to keep
understandable.
Up with it.
And I mean, I think I would even go as far to say that, like, I think that things like D&T help. I think they help give a little context to why we like the OVA so much. I think it is proof that while Yoshiki Tanaka definitely spun a very compelling story and built a very interesting world, that it is not purely that setting that sells Legend of the Galactic Heroes. It is that original, well, not original, you know what I mean? It is that OVA. It is so much of the creative choices that OVA makes that give it so much of its rich character and identity. And that, you know, D&T, for better or worse, is an example of, like, hey, you can capture a lot of the quality of that story is in the writing and its world, but much of it is also in the way it was portrayed, the way the characters were written, you know, even more, not subtle things, but more like tangential things like the VA work. Stuff like that can have a huge impact on
and we talked about on the other podcast, so just to mention it here, going back to the Sunglasses Yang thing, how tone deaf that was, right? Like, that's a good example of, like,
totally.
nobody checked that and realized, wow, this is ridiculous, and it's totally undermining this like serious heavy moment.
Right.
Right.
It's like like to give context, we were talking about when Yang wears sunglasses after hearing news of the death of Jessica Edwards, and he wears sunglasses to hide his puffy, teary eyes, and it is a thing where when you write it out, you're like, oh, that kind of makes sense. Like, I could see, yeah, like, Young might do something like that. Like, I could definitely see that. Like, gotta maintain, his composure, gotta maintain the sanctity of command, blah, blah, blah. But in animation, which is a visual medium, it is patently absurd.
Yes.
There is definitely a reason why the OVA, like, if Sunglasses Young is a bit from the original novel, then there is definitely a reason why the OVA was like, we can't do that. Like, that's...
So somebody sketched that one out and said, oh, this is ridiculous.
Like,
Especially in the era of, like, Top Gun sunglasses.
Right, and it's
Even
also,
more
yes, the
ridiculous.
sunglasses like, it's just, it's all ridiculous. It
Young
just...
Willie says deal with it.
Yes, I mean, here's the thing, right? Like, Sunglasses Young will be a Galactic Heroes meme for years to come. But it maybe not for all the right reasons,
Right.
Right, yeah, there's definitely a dark turn to deal with it.
Yes, but... And I think that, for better or worse, that is kind of, like, endemic to the problems with D&T as an adaptation, for better or worse.
Where did this season end? Because did it end with Kirkias?
It did.
Yes, it ends with the death of Kirkias. It's, relatively similar, actually. Like,
Oh, he still takes a rocket out of a guy's chest?
I think it was just like hidden in the coffin.
it was just hidden in the coffin itself, not in
Inside of-
Braunschwein's body cavity. Unfortunately, it's
Of
just
course,
that,
Braunschweig was still like a giant.
right, still a giant of a man. In fact, it would make more sense in D&T because he's like this.
Right.
He's like this big barrel-chested dude.
I'm sorry. If he doesn't take it out of the body, then that's objectively worse.
I know, right? It is objectively worse. It's just he carts in this he just carts in this gigantic sci-fi sarcophagus, like is this huge, sci-fi sleep pod looking thing, and it's like, okay, fine, that thing is so big, I could see how you could fit a bazooka like in a compartment there, but it makes a little bit more sense, but it is not nearly as entertaining.
At least he still brought a bazooka, though. Like,
Yes, he
Yes.
still did. Still had the laser ring. So, like,
There were a few other like detail changes that I was not happy with. Really,
oh
like
yeah,
this is just like a storytelling thing, but we all know that Kirkias was deprived of his sidearm at the time.
yeah.
But D&T like takes the 2 seconds to show him trying to go for his sidearm and
Right,
realizing it's not there.
Yes.
Which I think brings too much attention to that. I really loved how the OVA just let that knowledge hang for you to put together.
And I think that works a lot, or it just speaks to like how much less trust that the modern adaptation has in its viewers to pick up on that knowledge. That, oh, right, Kirkias doesn't have his sidearm, so he's got to get into a melee with this guy. Whereas the adaptation is like, again, this is what we talk about when we say that D&T feels much more like the modern Hollywood adaptation of the beloved long-running TV series, right? Like the movie version would totally take 5 seconds and have a musical stinger of Kirkias looking dumbfounded at his waist and not finding his gun there. When it's like, come on, Kirkias is better than that. Maybe
would it still look
maybe Bittenfield would forget that he didn't take his gun, but
Kirkias
Kirkias
wouldn't even reach for his gun.
right. Bittenfield wouldn't even consider the gun. He would just go in like
Kirkias would have already planned ahead. Okay, I don't have my gun, so if
Right.
anything does go down, I need to tackle this guy.
yeah.
Right.
Was it still somewhat ambiguous whether or not Overstein could have been behind
Yeah.
it?
Oh, yes, they still keep that
But
ambiguous,
also,
but
I think they also like don't have Overstein near Reinhardt, so he doesn't we don't get
push him
the
out
shot.
of the way?
Right, we don't get the shot of like Overstein putting himself in front of Reinhardt.
Huh.
right. Which I mean, it maybe in some ways actually does a better job of
of the ambiguity.
implying the ambiguity of that scene, whereas, like, for better or worse, even I am forced to admit by the end of the OVA,
Right.
Oberstein probably did not mean for Kirkeyes to get killed. Like,
Probably.
and like, if
I'm
you
still
locked him,
sure he was not sad about it.
I mean, he was, yes, right. Oberstein, of all people, did not shed any tears for Kirkeyes' death, and definitely was the first person, the snake that he is, to capitalize on it. But if you, like, locked him in a room and put a gun to his head, Oberstein would probably admit, no, that was not... I did not mean for that to happen.
Right.
It's just a nice bonus.
Just, yes. He wouldn't apologize for it, but, he wouldn't take credit for it. But yeah, it is definitely, like, little things like that that kind of make D&T a slightly weaker work as a whole.
Yeah. But for better
still
or worse, it is
still enjoyable as a whole. I will still say that, like, if you want to, like we didn't put that in here in the notes, but I wouldn't mind doing an impromptu, like, stack rank the Legend of Galactic Heroes OPs and EDs, and I would make a legitimate argument that Binary Star, the D&T opening, is better than at least half of the original OVA openings. So,
yeah, that's fine, because the openings are
yeah.
kind of weak compared to the ED. It's the ED.
Like,
It's
really,
right.
it's like the first, like, really, it's like the first and third OP of the OVA that are good. The other two are, like, kind of totally forgettable.
It's the, like, especially I think the first and last ED are the...
Yeah, I mean,
ones.
honestly,
I like all
stack
the
ranking
EDs,
the
honestly.
EDs is probably a harder fight because...
Yeah, because they're all kind of similar.
Yeah,
and everything.
Right.
All
The
the
first
same
one, I think,
crooners.
is...
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, Marlon, what did you say?
I was just saying they're all these crooners, like just good.
Oh, yeah, totally,
Good,
yeah.
It's all the same singer.
I mean, I think they
Yeah.
definitely benefited from having the same musical identity, whereas I think the OP switched singers at least a couple times, right?
Yeah, the first
Right.
two are the same lady, and then
Okay,
3
yeah.
and 4 are different from each
Right,
other.
which kind of loses some of that quality of that.
Also,
like-
the first three have much better English. The rest of the
Yeah,
fourth
I
one just
mean-
kind of falls apart.
Yeah.
Fun fact: the singer of the first two openings is best known for her songs that have been in DDR.
Oh, really?
You know what? I can believe it.
And for introducing acid jazz to Japan.
Sure, I'll
Oh,
believe
okay.
it. There's a lot of weird legacy shit from Legend of the Galactic Heroes that continues to
most
reverberate every
definitely,
few years.
How
Yeah.
many of the production people went on to Spider Riders?
Oh my god, we should investigate.
Should have looked that
At
up.
least one VA, probably.
Yeah, like I'm sure there's at least one connection between Legend of the Galactic Heroes and hit TV anime Spider Writers.
Jesus Christ. But yes, like D&T
Running
will
gag
still,
for everybody out there. Yeah, I'm sure that I'll totally understand that. But yeah.
Right.
D&T, like for better or worse, D&T will still also be like my first exposure to Legend of the Galactic Heroes.
Yeah. And, like in many ways, I think it still did a good job of getting us invested in checking out the rest of it. Right?
Yeah.
Like
I do. I mean, our opinions are divided between you guys and me and Marlon, who watched the OVA first. So I have to wonder if that really is the difference.
Yeah.
But
right. I mean, I guess it's just like, even as somebody who wholly admits D&T is, kind of the inferior work, I think there are certain qualities and charms that it has that I can appreciate, just like usually the modernisms kind of hurt it, but there's a couple little things here and there that I think really like help give it a little bit more flavor in certain areas, right? Like Iro and I had talked in the past about, like, for example, the interior decorating of Iserlohn is a lot more like fleshed out in D&T, and kind of actually does a better job of reminding you, oh right, like this is not like just any old generic space station. This is a former Empire installation. Like it has Empire style like architecture and interior decorating and like like furniture, and it's like
yeah, I'd go with like the background settings and like sort of atmosphere like in those areas, and even maybe
Right.
maybe even the space battles to a certain degree. I that's maybe a little more controversial, but
I mean, I think it's definitely an argument to be made. The different approaches to these space battles, right?
they're
Legend
kind of
Galactic
more
Heroes,
exciting in a more like, I guess,
conventional,
just
like
yeah,
conventionally
like in
exciting.
a just like on the surface level, like just getting your adrenaline pumping type of thing.
Yeah,
Less
yeah.
triangles on a display.
Yeah.
it is definitely like, I hate to say that use this word, but it is like D&T's battles are a little bit more like generically exciting in the sense that there's more going on screen. Like because they're CG models, they could do more, you know, dramatic camera pans, and the lasers are bigger and flashier. But
on the other hand, I mean, like Yang's fake fleet movement thing, or like
right, like there's a quality to the original OVA that just cannot be replaced.
Yes,
Truly
you
the
can't.
cell
You
back
can't.
and forth,
Right.
This
Some
is
like
making
fucking
me think about.
trigger level of just.
Yeah.
Anyways, what Marlon?
I was just saying, it did. I am starting to think though, going back to Oblitzer, like, how did they dig that hole? And
It's fine.
It's making me go back to questions that I probably don't need to ask.
Yeah. I mean, that is definitely like yes. Like in many ways, them collapsing a bridge maybe makes more sense in a sci-fi perspective, whereas like in the original OVA, Roythal and Mittermeier just dig a hole somewhere in a space station, and it's like, wait a second. Like,
and like nobody noticed. Like, did they throw a
like,
bunch
the
of
longer
smoke
you
grenades
think
or
about
something?
it, you're like,
maybe
yeah.
the hole was already there, like got like punched through from laser fire.
Sure, why not?
It's
Yeah.
more
Alright.
like, how did the space station have dirt to be dug in the first place?
Wasn't it made out of an old asteroid or something?
Yeah, but
Um,
you know, just.
Don't worry about it.
Also, as somebody who has dug a hole before large enough to fit a human being in it, let me tell you, that takes a while. Like, that's
They have
not
power armor.
Yeah, go
that's
6
not
feet
something
deep.
you do in like 20 minutes, man. That's work. That's like a whole day's work right there.
They have power armor. I'm sure that helps.
Sure.
all right.
Anyways, I think this is not the end of us litigating D&T. I assume
so.
that D&T will continue to get seasons. It's hard to say if D&T will get the full OVA treatment. I mean, you have to remember, right? Like Legend of the Galactic Heroes aired
Ran
over
for
the course of
forever,
like
yeah.
a decade and a
decade.
half or something like that.
Yeah,
so
it's not
it
like
would
they're really condensing it that much either.
right.
Yeah.
So it would not surprise me if D&T, for better or worse, is with us for the next decade.
Yeah.
So
I mean, I would
you
still
know.
say if you're the type of person where it comes down to no Galactic Heroes or D&T only, you should still probably watch D&T.
yeah, I think it's still worth watching. It is still it is not, you know, it is not like so compromised that it is unwatchable or that it's contrary to the original themes of the show. Like
You could pay the $10 for Crunchyroll to watch D&T, or you could pay
High
the
Dive.
$4.99 to High Dive.
right.
EA.
How much is VRV, which has both?
Did they actually put? I don't remember if they actually put Legend of Galactic Heroes on
Oh,
VRV
maybe
yet,
not.
though.
I thought
they
it just
not
had
because
all.
we've been
I,
saying you can watch it on VRV for
Maybe
well,
they did.
close
I
to
don't
a
remember.
year at this point.
That was a while
I thought
ago.
I thought VRV just had the entire libraries of those
oh
things.
boy, have we been communicating? Have we been
Oh, no.
miscommunicating this whole time?
I'll
Oh,
look it up
boy.
before the show's over. So that
No
we're
wonder
not,
why we never
I,
got
uh,
that deal.
We've always emphasized High Dive.
Yes, we say High Dive first. Okay, fine. One last thing I do want to say that I think DNT does well is they make it pretty unambiguous that Reinhardt is just as much at fault for the bombing at
Right.
Westerland.
That
Is
was
it Westerland?
that was yeah,
Yeah,
Westerland.
Westerland.
That was the thing
Yeah.
the OVA changed, right, to make
Right,
Reinhardt
so-
more sympathetic.
Right, so, you know, very helpful commenters told us that one of the most controversial changes to the original OVA is that they sort of wash Reinhardt's hands of the Westerland incident to make him more sympathetic. You know, that, that mean old Oberstein moved behind his back and let the bombing happen. But the DNT makes it pretty fucking clear that Reinhardt explicitly signs off on letting Westerland happen.
Right.
Like, it is a pretty, like, harsh reminder that, Reinhardt's path to his golden kingdom was paved in a lot of potentially unnecessary bloodshed. And the D&T kind of does a good job of making that pretty apparent. Whereas I think that for better or worse in the OVA, you know, I don't think any of us would argue, but I think a person could, like, weasel their way through an argument that Reinhardt, like, you know, did nothing wrong or something.
Was not fully culpable, at least.
Right. So, you know, in some ways, in a couple key ways, I think DNT does does a good job. But yes, as a whole, maybe not not as will not be as timeless as the OVA. But anyways, now that we've spent about half an hour talking about a show kind of entirely unrelated to the one we actually want to talk about,
I love it.
let's move on to kind of the most general kind of topic we have, which is that it's been a couple months since we all watched Legend of the Galactic Heroes. We are all firmly in a post Legend of the Galactic Heroes world. We have all, I think at this point, we have all gotten over the funk of having finished such a show. And I want to ask you guys, like, now in 2020, a couple months after having watched the whole OVA, how do you feel about it?
Last week I was having a conversation with multiple other people, and before I knew it, I went on a 30-minute diatribe about how great Legend of Galactic Heroes was, and why they all needed to watch it, and how relevant it was to the modern day, etc.
Did you convert anyone?
I'm not sure. I hope
Well,
so.
look, it's a
We're
tough
those
sell.
people. We're gonna sound crazy.
But yes, I think Iro, I think that statement alone, that we have become those people, is the biggest re-endorsement you could give for how we feel about Legend of the Galactic Heroes. That I think from here on out, in any other social situation, we find people just idly talking about any topic. It doesn't even have to be anime.
That reminds me of some show I watched.
I've been thinking about it a lot in the same kind of mindset as Gatchaman crowds. Like, I keep, for some reason, going back to that. Maybe because Gatchaman crowds is also very relevant to the modern political situation. But just, yeah, it has very good, metaphors. It's very timeless, I think. The only thing is, as far as like recommending it to other people, I'm starting to see, now that I'm distancing myself, that 110 episodes is still a lot to ask.
It's a big
anyone.
commitment.
And
I mean, that's why it took us so long.
Right.
I
And like
mean,
us committing to a very measured pace, I think, was a big contributor.
yeah, I mean, I definitely that's the thing, right? I think all of us here, either directly or indirectly, have been either told or heard people talking about Legend of the Galactic Heroes. It's a name that I think if you have been following anime long enough, you will have heard somebody mention it by name or posted a meme about it. And, frankly, I think it took many of us here, like, close to a decade of hearing about it on and off before finally watching it. So I can definitely understand the trepidation.
Yeah, I think we learned our lesson, that people that were always pitching it to me or that I saw pitching on the internet were like, oh, it's this huge complex thing with all these characters. There's hundreds of characters, and
Right.
like that coupled with the fact that it's 110 episodes, like a lot of people are trying to sell it that all as positive stuff. I'm like, I don't have time for that. But
Right.
but now that we've watched it, we know that's not really the way to sell this show.
Yeah,
right?
I mean,
because all the characters and everything, they're there, but like that's not what the strong point of the show
like
is.
you begin to realize almost like within the first like 5-6 episodes that like it's not necessarily that you're here for the complex political machinations. I mean, we are, but it is that like they are specifically anchored by a few very like central characters, right? Like, for better or worse, it is not that people talk about autocracy versus democracy. What people talk about is Reinhard versus Yang. Like,
Right.
It's, and I hate to use this is really reductive, and I would not imply this show is comparable to the quality of Legend of the Galactic Heroes at all. But in many ways, I feel like if I were to try to recommend Galactic Heroes to like a more modern, audience, I would almost say, think of it like Game of Thrones, right? Like,
Right.
where you are following a few specific characters who are emblematic or represent like their specific like ideologies and feelings about how the world works, and you are following their trials and tribulations to realizing those ideologies as a reality, and kind of like brushing up against the world in both positive and negative ways.
I say just show him a bunch of screen caps with Yang.
My favorite is that one like 2-minute clip from I think after some battle or other where Yang is sick, and Julian's making him hot punch or whatever, and Yang like talks about military history,
Right.
talks about good violence and bad violence, and
Right.
how the pen is mightier than the sword, etc. And it's like some of the densest 2 minutes of that show.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's like, yes, that show is extremely dense. Like, there's no way of getting around it.
Yeah.
Right. But I do think that there's a way to sell the show like in a more not simplistic manner, but in a more digestible manner, because I do think that the show actually does a pretty good job of slowly onboarding you into the world.
Right.
And
There's a part of me with more time that is still kind of disappointed by the ending.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I kind of wanted to touch on that a little bit, because if we're talking about like how we feel, what is it, a month or two later at this point, I do have to say, and I was trying to think of the right words to express this, because overall I still think it's one of the best things I've ever watched. Just I think maybe my enthusiasm was dampened a little bit by the last season.
Right.
And by that I mean, like, when I was watching the show up until maybe halfway through season 4, I was so excited about watching it every week.
Yeah.
It was like dominating, like, I was thinking about it all the time.
Right.
I was just I'm
kept
thinking the
getting
show can
ahead
do
of you
nothing
guys all the
wrong.
time.
And like by the time we reached the end, I felt like that was not there anymore.
It almost felt obligatory, right?
Yeah, like
well,
we were
here
just,
we are. This is the end.
Yeah. Now we're just trying. Now we just need to wrap this up. And
Yeah.
it's like, first and last impressions are super important. When like that's the last thing you remember of the show, I think it impacts your long-term feelings. On it.
I mean, the studio didn't even exist at the time, but maybe Legend of the Galactic Heroes should have taken a book out of the Trigger School of how to end an anime.
Go into
Young
extra
should have
space.
Yes, yeah. I was gonna say. I guess Legend of the Galactic Heroes went to space in its first episode, so they should have gone to super space where Yang Wenli is still alive and
stab your main character in the head and promise season 2.
God.
That wasn't Trigger technically, was it?
yes. Just have. I'd love to say have Reinhard and Yang get into their respective flagships, which transform into giant robots. The first OP starts playing, and
Sure.
I mean, you guys
you
promised the when with Dark Yang embraces his
right, the
The
Dark
Satsuido Hado.
versus the powered up Reinhardt.
yes, with his
unleashing
magic
the-
jar.
And what our duo is it just Reinhardt and Young's new type ghosts go speak to Char and Amuro,
Oh
and they
god.
all fly and tell Banagher that something or other. I don't know.
Yeah,
Whatever.
but I mean, I think
They'll hang out with Lala
I think-
soon.
I think even watching season 4, I didn't appreciate till having time to sink it in, or have it all sink in later, how much we missed Yang, and not just because we love Yang, but his role was so important in balancing the show out. Like the show was that back and forth between Yang's ideals and Reinhardt's ideals, and that was gone
Yeah, I
for
think.
almost an entire season.
I mean, I think for better or worse, like, there are many people out there who are like, yeah, the show kind of basically ends where Yang dies, and the rest of it is basically just one long epilogue, basically.
Right.
And I think, for better or worse, like, I mean, I definitely agree with you guys. Like, I think season 4 is definitely the weakest by a long shot, but I gotta be honest, guys, like, I think as good as Legend of the Galactic Heroes was, like, it was given an impossible task, right? Like, with expectations that high, like,
Right.
because you guys are right. Like, that is a show that I looked forward to every week. That it, in my mind, got better with every passing episode. Like,
Yep.
it was gonna hit a critical mass somewhere, and you know, I think that for better or worse, that was them not stretching out season 4 into 2 seasons for better or worse. Like, it's, but even then, I'm not sure how much that would help.
Yeah,
Like,
no, I don't even know if that would have really been the solution. Maybe just ending it faster after Yang dies or something.
Yeah.
Or having Julian pick up more of the slack. I mean, it wasn't that Julian wasn't picking up the slack. It's just that he got like hardly any screen
right,
time.
he didn't have enough time to do anything with it. Right?
Does
Like,
anyone else kind of wish that the Earth cults never showed up again at the end? It just kind of seemed like this weird, unnecessary, the whole
I think that-
siege of Reinhardt's place at the very end.
Well, Marlon, I think to echo that, I think that kind of gets into why we say that the end of season 4 kind of feels like an obligatory checking of boxes on a list, right? Like,
Right.
Yeah.
it's like somebody there was like, oh, wait, the Earth cult is still in play. We need to gin up some reason for why they would launch a suicidal, like, final attack on Reinhard that will
Right.
conveniently wipe them out from history so that there are no more problems in the Galactic Empire.
I mean, it would make more sense
Yeah.
just to have it be the next chapter of history. You know,
Right,
like,
I mean, for better, like,
you
that
could
would be a
think
little
of
bit more
the end of the
realistic.
Cold
There are-
War, where
there are still
were
some
all
like
these things-
hanging. Go ahead.
It's just like I was thinking about the Cold War and how you could kind of do a story of the Cold War where, you know, like America ostensibly, you know, obviously we did terrible things, but we're nominally the hero, and along with the UK and other powers, and you see like the fall of communism at the end. You can see kind of a natural break in the story.
Take down the wall, etc.
But you can see then also our propping up of the Mujahideen fighters, the building up of Saudi Arabia as kind of this thing that continues on beyond that story. And so
Right,
even
like
though,
the consequences of those actions.
yeah, and so like you don't need to have the Earth cult be defeated. I don't think, because the story was about Yang and Reinhardt. It was never about the Earth
Yeah,
cult.
I mean,
I just
I mean, for better, I think for better or worse. Like, I mean, I don't know if this is like, I don't know if this is like a fault of Tanaka's own biases or whatever, but for better or worse, the Earth cult is definitely kind of one of the not as well explored aspects of the setting. Like, I think they represent an important factor in the setting and what it has to say about, like, how ideologies drive people and how religious extremism is one of the most powerful drivers in, like, human society. But they are not a particularly nuanced faction. They
Right.
like
Right.
it definitely
They're cartoon villains.
right. They're cartoon villains in a story where even like the fascists have sympathetic aspects. And the Earth Cult, for better or worse, are kind of like they're almost like video game villains, right? Like they kind of just exist to like let you mow them down without feeling any remorse. You know, and I'm not saying that the Earth Cult needed their arc where they were like they got justified, their actions felt justified, or they were given sympathetic motivations, but yeah, like you even look at like, and again, maybe it's just that like, at the time when Legend of the Galactic Heroes was written, there was not a lot of documentation, there was not a lot of like historical work done on the history of modern religious extremism. But like in 2020, when we have plenty of documents, plenty of accounts that explain, again, not that we want to sympathize or support them, but that explain and give context to the motivations of many religious extremists in modern day, where they come from, what their motivations are. In comparison, the Earth Cult definitely feels kind of flat. Yeah.
I mean, they all wear robes. It's like they weren't even given personalities within themselves.
Right.
Unfortunately. Well, I guess all the Empire guys wear the same clothes, but you could still tell.
Its military uniform is different.
Yeah, that's true.
I think there are still a few like things they did leave for the later, like Erwin Yosef still out there type stuff. Like,
that's true.
Yeah.
You have some of those hanging.
that was
threads.
wild.
Right.
Such a what a
What a
weird
ride that was.
God, the fucking emotional highs and lows of that entire Erwin Yosef subplot. Christ.
The, like, fake corpse part.
God.
You mean a real corpse?
Oh yeah,
I mean,
the real corpse that was not actually Iro and Joseph.
Man,
Yeah,
it's truly ridiculous. Right, but I mean, Iro has a point that, like,
yeah.
I do appreciate that Legend of the Galactic Heroes left enough dangling plot threads to give you the impression at the time that, right, like, history doesn't end where we stop watching. Like, it will continue. I guarantee you within at least the next 2 generations of Reinhardt's empire, there will be a succession crisis. Like, I would literally bet money on it because, like, sure, Reinhardt might have endeared the almost unrealistic undying loyalty of his closest, most powerful, like, subordinates.
I mean, his dying words were, "My son is in charge unless he's not."
Right, like, let me tell you, a lot of admirals and nobles down the line are going to take advantage of those dying words.
Right.
How long till Felix Mittermeier learns of his true parentage and decides to
Right,
take revenge
exactly,
upon
exactly.
Alexander Siegfried?
Oh, man. But I will say, like, despite us kind of just getting to our criticisms here, I still do think that, like, on the whole, I think Legend of the Galactic Heroes is definitely one of the most important things I've ever watched.
I do want to be clear. Like, when I say, like, my enthusiasm was dampened, like, it's not to take away from the overall picture of, like, it's taking something that was, like, flawless in my mind to, okay, there are some criticisms.
It brought it down to earth. It made it
that can be had of it.
Like Reinhard von Lohengrin, it started off untouchable, golden, almost otherworldly, and by the end,
it got sick.
It became something slightly more mundane.
You're never disappointed in something you hate.
Yeah. But yeah, it's just like, I mean, to kind of get into it, like, you know, I don't want to, like, go full, like, political here, but it's like, I think that for better or worse, Legend of the Galactic Heroes radicalized me. Like, let me
I
explain.
totally understand what you're saying.
Let me explain here. I don't. When I say radicalized me, I don't mean like fucking. I don't mean I've become some sort of, like, you know, extremist. I mean more like. I think I care. I lowercase c cared about politics in both fiction and in my real life day-to-day before Legend of the Galactic Heroes, but there is something about the way Legend of the Galactic Heroes approaches society and politics, the nature of, like, power and how systems are wielded and exploited by individuals, that, I don't know, like, maybe I'm just an ignorant person, but in some ways that show opened up my eyes to, like, this is what people are literally doing in real life right now.
Right.
Like,
This is an amazing time to be watching Legend of the Galactic
right,
Heroes.
like,
Yes.
I was, like, you immediately start making connections between what people are doing in Legend of the Galactic Heroes and real life, and I think it maybe speaks to the power of fiction to open your eyes to this, like, here's the thing, right? We love escapist fiction, right? We love Trigger.
Oh, hell yeah.
We're all watching, like, Dorohedoro this season. Like, you know, we love fiction and media for what it is, but I think that, like, Legend of the Galactic Heroes is that reminder that, oh yeah, like, fiction can occasionally, like, clue you into, or it can, like, take concepts that maybe you were on some level, like, you know, you understood, like, you know, democracy good, fascism bad, but
Right.
like, you understood that on some, like, instinctual
good
level,
parents.
but Legend of the Galactic Heroes helps, like, break it down into, like, okay, you understand those things, right? But, like, let me break it down with, like, some really, like, not simple metaphors, but, like, really relatable and compelling metaphors to help you understand, oh, democracy complex, fascism still bad.
Yeah,
Right.
I think it really does connect it to the human experience.
Yeah.
Right.
And not just like a political science textbook, right?
Right. Like, I think, obviously, in a perfect world, we'd all be reading, like, political science textbooks. But, like, you know, we're only human.
Yo.
Right. And seeing how that applies to people, in people's lives,
Right.
makes it much more real and makes you care about it more, right?
Right.
And that's like the real power of fiction, if the author is choosing to use their platform to say something.
Right.
That's then that's in my opinion the best kind of fiction is the ones that can accomplish that kind of stuff.
Right. And like, it couldn't have been done unless we were extremely compelled by the characters of Legend of the Galactic Heroes. Like, the reason why, at least for us specifically, again, maybe because of the political climate, something like the death of Jessica Edwards, like, sticks with us so much, when maybe to, like, fans who watched this before 2019, 2020, maybe the death of Jessica Edwards is just, like, a weird footnote. Like, oh, that's a shame, like, too bad for Yang, but, like, watching that now, it takes on an entirely different context because of, like, both the real world, like, things we are dealing with, and also, like, oh, we are compelled and invested in the fates of these characters.
Right.
It does make me think, if I can go on a philosophy tangent.
By all means.
So, like you're saying, how, your circumstances can definitely shade how you see things. It makes me think of the difference between John Locke and I'm blanking on his first name, but Hobbes in the Leviathan.
Oh, Hobbes versus Locke.
Yeah. And how Hobbes grew up in the English Civil War, which was this really bloody battle that really it pitted the worst of the English people against each other, and he came out of it with a very pessimistic view of plurality. And so that's why the Leviathan is very much this ultramontane monarchist book, where it's like the king has supreme power, everyone is meant to even supreme military power, supreme religious power, and this is the only way to have order, because everything, like, if you leave people to their own, they're going to slaughter. Whereas you have John Locke, who grew up in the time of the Glorious Revolution, which was this very republican overthrow of a monarch which the people rejected. And you can kind of see that the times that someone grows up in really can change the way they view politics.
Definitely. And I mean, I think that honestly that's a pretty good point to bring up. Like, I think you can definitely see that with Legend of the Galactic Heroes, where I'm pretty sure fans who watched that thing when it originally aired versus fans who watched that 10 years ago versus fans who are watching it now, I think definitely do arrive at different conclusions, and probably take away certain points as more relevant more relevant to them specifically than others, right? Like, I think that is
or
why,
even different parts of the world, or like what kind of government systems you've grown up with, or you're going to get different opinions.
Definitely. And I think it really speaks to how timeless Legend of the Galactic Heroes is, that even when people are taking away different things from that show, it is still, it is still so relevant. It is still so, like, it is still so nuanced in the way it approaches these, like, myriad of very real, relatable, like, political and societal situations that, people are still people are still, like, coming up with new takes for a show that is as old as it is. And I think that's really fascinating. And yeah, I think, long story short, we all still like Legend of the Galactic Heroes a lot.
And we've covered half of the later show notes in this conversation.
All right, fine. We should move on then to our next topic, which I think is an interesting one, and I do want to get into, because I think this is a really interesting one to get into.
This
from
is
a
something
writing standpoint.
I've been personally thinking about a lot.
Yes. Mm-hmm. So, the next topic we have is, does Legend of the Galactic Heroes have character development? Are there character arcs in Legend of the Galactic Heroes in the traditional sense?
I'm saying no. Like, my stance is broadly that there aren't really. I'm the one who put this in the show notes. But, like, looking at the show in retrospect and thinking about it, and thinking about how enraptured I was by the show, while simultaneously doing a lot of talking with other writers and such, who we're always like talking about how you need to ground things in characters and have good character development, like watch how the story unfolds according to the arcs of the characters' growth. And that gets me thinking about how interested I was in Legend of Galactic Heroes, and how, at least me looking at it, I didn't feel like any of the characters really changed or grew over time. Like, maybe you could make the case for Julian growing in skill, but he does not fundamentally change, like, his ideology or temperament, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I think this kind of stems from, like...
I would push back a little bit on that. I mean, if you look at... I think he's much more passive at the beginning of the show, where by the end, he's much more confident and in charge.
But I would say what Iro's talking about is, like... I think that in conventional...
He does not learn a lesson and, you know, get what he needs instead of what he wants, etc., etc.
Yeah, because I think the conventional wisdom about fiction is that sometime during the story, the protagonist or the primary character or what have you must be, like, fundamentally broken down and built back up again, right? Like, or not broken down, but they must learn something that traumatic, like what good is a character that is already like completely fulfilled as a character from the beginning, right? Like,
right.
I think that is the conventional wisdom, anyways.
Yeah.
And
so I think is a lot of this just because the show is presented as nonfiction?
I think that's some of it.
The way it's written is like written almost more like a documentary or something about history, where you're basically just have to present what happened. Like, you can't write the story, right? So does that have to do with it? Which I think is something that the show tries to balance a lot, and most of the time succeeds, where you're trying to tell interesting stories, which there are certain ways you can do that in fiction, but they're also presenting it as like a historical, almost documentary, not quite a documentary, but like a movie based on history or something, right?
I mean, I don't know the literary terms because I don't know that stuff real good, but, like, I think it is, like, Legend of the Galactic Heroes presents things in a very, like, literal fashion. Like, the events on screen are exactly as they occurred in the context of the story that is being told, right? Whereas you compare that with, the extreme opposite end of the spectrum of, like an Ikehara or something, where the events being portrayed on screen, it is hard to tell are those the literal events that are happening in context of the story? Is it in the mind's eye? Is it allegorical? You know what I mean, right? Like,
that's kind of like the extreme opposite.
Yeah.
But I'm thinking, like, even like if you're writing a fictional story, you have total control to say this character is going to be this way, and this is going to happen in his life, and he's going to have this kind of epiphany, and that traditional fictional character development you're talking about, right? Whereas if you were writing a nonfiction book about something that happened in history, you don't have you don't have control over what happened. You have control to pick what parts to tell, but, like, you can't make the person do that. And I think that's part of the show's strength, maybe, is that it that makes it feel almost more realistic, that it's presented as, like, nonfiction, like I'm reading about actual things that happened in history. But I mean, I'm not even saying that makes the show better or worse or good or bad or anything. But I think that's maybe what makes it feel more unique, because it doesn't do that.
Yeah, I was gonna say, to echo your point, Jill, it kind of makes me think of how, we always talk about how, like, the old adage, right, is that Legend of the Galactic Heroes does not have lore, it has history. Like, this idea that, like, the characters feel so realized. I think one of the strongest things Legend of the Galactic Heroes does is that whenever the characters make decisions, we don't feel like, oh, the writer made them do that. The writer did make them do that, but they've masterfully created this illusion that, oh, Reinhard reacts in this way not because the writer said Reinhard has to react in that way, but because that is the only possible way in which Reinhard could have reacted to this situation, considering what we know of him as a character and the external factors around him at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And that gets.
I think.
Go ahead.
I think that's when the show is at its weakest, when it tries to like force things in for the sake of poetic justice, like we said, like the Earth cult thing as an example, right? Like when they do try to kind of bend the rules for the sake of, well, this is what, you know, from a literary standpoint is supposed to happen next.
Right.
That's probably when it's, you know, it's at its weakest point.
Definitely, because, like, on one hand, don't get me wrong, everybody, deeply satisfying to watch Julian put one between the eyes of the Earth cult at the end of that show. Very satisfying.
Absolutely.
Very emotionally cathartic. But as a story, maybe wasn't the right choice, right?
Wasn't the right time for that, right? But
should have just gotten.
But I mean,
should have
that's
just
the
got our
balance.
epilogue series 20 years later, where like grizzled Julian
Punished Venom Julian.
Yeah, punished
from
Julian.
ED3, right?
Yeah.
ED3, no, but I mean that's the but that's the thing. The show has to balance that though, because if you just make it a dry, like, if you make it too dry, then it's gonna be boring to watch, right? So I think the show does a good job of balancing those things, but maybe the reason why it is not following those conventional, you know, rules for you know, fictional characters is because it's trying to present itself as history.
Right. Well, to bring up one more thing before we move on to the next topic, how much of this is that most of the cast of Legend of the Galactic Heroes are adults?
There's that.
And we are used to watching anime in which the primary age, the average age of your cast are teenagers.
Yeah.
And
I would
it is
say
much more,
like, just because most anime is here, like most fiction does not necessarily also teenagers.
I mean,
all
I
right,
think you
fine,
still
fine.
can have, like, I definitely am not the same person I was when I was 22.
Sure, obviously you can still have character development as you get older, but you know what I mean, right? Of
Right.
like someone like Wenli, who is like what, in his early 30s, is like, look, I'm not going to say
knows
when you're
what
in
he's
your
about.
early 30s you become self-assured about your place in the world, but
Oh, I hope not.
he feels like, you know what I mean, is
Yes.
like Yang Wenli had his like big character arc in his teens like 20 years ago, right? Like whatever shit he did in the FPA back then that I'm sure we'll see in Gaiden. But and I wouldn't even push back a little bit on the idea that, like, you know, there is no character development. Like, I think that, for example, you look at Reinhard, right? Like, Reinhard is largely the same person he is from start to finish, but I think there's like a lot of big events that happen to him that do make him fundamentally shift as a person, right? Like the biggest, of course, being the death of Kirkiais. Like,
Sure, yeah.
I think a Reinhard that had Kirkiais by his side his whole life is a very different Reinhard that leads to a very different empire, right? Like, I mean,
Yeah.
what's the old adage? If only Siegfried Kirkiais were here. Like,
Only.
Right.
like, I think that, you know, there are characters that go through developments. You know, I think that, you know, even on a more minor level, you have, you know, really small things like, you know, Reuenthal's whole
Right.
struggle with his loyalty to Reinhard versus his ambition for leadership.
So I'd like.
Oh, I think Ruenthal stayed
Right.
true
So-
to his ideals.
So
till the
I'd like
very
to
end.
posit the idea that because all of the characters like shows a lot of characters who like represent specific ideologies and such, or like tend to stick to their guns of how they think things ought to be, and so the show can have, it's about how this person who will act consistently with their ideology continuously reacts to an ever-changing status quo.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. So, like, if Oberstein is meant to represent Machiavelli, he's got to act like Machiavelli for the entire show, right?
Right.
Right.
No matter the situation.
I think that's a good way of putting it. And
And I think,
with
yeah,
that,
I think you can see that with, Young and Reinhardt and all that.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it. Like they are fairly static characters, but extraordinary events are introduced to them, and their reactions are kind of what make that interesting. I think with that, we're going to move on to our next topic here, which is maybe just the G rants about history topic, but my apologies. But one more time, does Legend of the Galactic Heroes support great man theory?
Yes.
To give some context to this. You think so, Marlon?
In a certain way. I mean...
All right.
Sorry, I'll let you, if you have...
No. I want you to explain that. So first, I'm just going to set up for some context. I mean, I have a feeling anybody listening to this podcast knows what that is, but great man theory is kind of the classic approach to historiography. That is the study of history itself. That history is defined and affected by specific... that in every time and every age, there are... a small group of important individuals who are largely deciding the flow of history. That it is the decisions of a specific few in specific positions of power that have the most effect on how society changes, what happens to nations, etc., etc. The counter-argument to that has kind of emerged in the last decade or so is historical contingency, which instead argues that yes, like people in positions of power do have great amounts of influence, but that history or human society as a whole is affected by a wider set of circumstances.
Forces and trends.
Yes, forces and trends that are defined by societal trends and shifts, often economic and societal, that are happening on a more grounded level. So the thing I want to make clear about the theory of historical contingency is that it isn't saying that events in history are predetermined. Far from it. It positions itself in opposition to teleological history, that being the theory that events in history were inevitable. Instead, it argues that while things may seem obvious in hindsight, that was not necessarily the case for those who lived through it. At its core, it argues that historical events are dependent, contingent even, on multiple causes ranging from both individual to societal, and that those causes were themselves affected by prior conditions, so on and so forth. And yeah, those trends kind of move upward in their effects on history.
There are circumstances that have to put them in that position where they're having an impact, right?
And yes, those individuals have agency. They are making their own decisions, but they themselves are victims to, I guess you could call it the tides of history. Yeah. Anyways, Marlon, you said you believe Legend of the Galactic Heroes advocates for great man theory.
It's just hard to see Reinhardt as anything other than this kind of outlook. At the very, because you see how they describe his drive and how it keeps pushing him. Do you think that how he's able to kind of take this drive to become the emperor as being part of contingency?
So the thing is about historical contingency is it's not necessarily arguing that individuals have no agency in history. It's more meant. So really, the reason historical contingency rises as a alternate theory for history is that great man theory tends to veer too much into this idea that what you really need to change society is a great heroic individual. And I'm definitely not denying that Reinhardt is an outsized
hero.
Right, a galactic hero, so to speak, right? But in many ways, like, is Reinhardt's rise to power also not the result of the Golden Bomb dynasty's own stagnation, its own corruption, like, that allows him to rise to that degree of power in the first place? Is it not as a result, yes, Reinhardt is definitely, influencing history to a great degree, but how much of it is also that he is an outstanding individual during a particularly dim point in both the FPA and the Galactic Empire's time in history?
Right.
Think back.
If I
Go
could
ahead.
add,
Go.
if I could add to just one point to that, because I don't think it necessarily supports any theory at all, but they do, because they do present both, because the two great men in the show are Yang and Reinhardt, right?
Yes.
And they do present both the positives and negatives of their ideals. Maybe a little more positives on Reinhardt sometime, but that I think that's more screen time than what the show is actually trying to tell you.
Oh yeah.
What I would say, one thing that did make me raise an eyebrow is when Yang dies. The remnants of whatever they call themselves after that, they still have to use Yang's name to get stuff done.
Yeah. I mean,
I feel like if anything was supporting Great Man theory, like that was the part that stood out to me of like, you know, they still felt like they had to, and the show kind of supported that they still had to cash in on Yang's influence in order to stay relevant and, you know, stay in, you know, in power or whatever. So if anything, maybe that would be an argument that the show is supporting it, but I think overall it has a balanced enough take.
yeah. I mean,
Where you couldn't say they're definitively making a statement either way.
The kind of pushback on that I will actually use, that I find the character himself kind of actually does a good job of kind of echoing both historical theories, but in many ways maybe for me is like the proof that in some degree, even before the term existed, Legend of the Galactic Heroes understood that history is kind of a combination of both like notable singular individuals and themselves being like, you know, victims of, you know, quote unquote fate, is Roenthal's. So Roenthal, right, unbelievably talented individual, right? Like he is, you know, one of the great men we are talking of here, but eventually still forced, well, quote unquote forced to rebel against Reinhardt. And the show kind of takes great pains to show that much of this is entirely out of Roenthal's control, right? Like much of this is like the people below him or people outside of his influence, right? And like,
Right.
you know, societal factors, right? Like they say that it's like, you know, they constantly point out that like it's almost like society or fate itself is saying that Roenthal must fight against Reinhardt, that this is preordained fate. And I don't know if I'd go that far, but it's more like the societal factors that are coming into play. And like, you know, when I say smaller figures, right, I mean guys like Grillpalzer, guys like
Lang.
Right, like Lang, like because again, the thing about historical contingencies is it's not arguing that like there are no great individuals. It's kind of more arguing that there are many individuals, often nameless, who contribute to, you know, the greater whole of how history changes. And I kind of would argue that Roenthal's fate is kind of a perfect example of that. Like, you know, if
He's
like
still responsible for his own choices.
I mean, yes, I'm not saying Roenthal is without agency here. I'm saying that
we're talking about what the show is trying to say, and at several points they do say if Reinhardt was born 100 years later, he probably would have been, you know, one of the greatest emperors of all time or something, right? But because of the age he was born in, and he was in
Right, like great men
era as
right,
Reinhardt.
Great men theory basically advocates that these individuals are like somehow superior in such a way, and that allows them to affect history.
Right. And so I think that like a character like, you know, Roenthal, who like, I mean, yes, okay, I'm not saying Roenthal is blameless here. Roenthal brings a lot of the shit he gets at the end on himself, but I think that his arc kind of towards the end as a whole is kind of more representative. Like, even the most powerful men in the world are victims to, you know, the tides of society itself, and that you can only fight against it for so long. And to kind of echo that, why I do think in some ways it does echo Great Man Theory is that at the end, Roenthal commits an act that is nothing but pure agency in his cold-blooded murder of Job Trunit. Like, no societal factors there. That is
Right.
Roenthal for himself deciding, I'm going to shoot this guy.
I mean,
Right.
And so, yes, that is a singular action taken by a singular individual that maybe has great resounding effects, but his fate at the end of the day, I think, is like, yes, he certainly brings it upon himself, but like how much of that is also how much of that was inevitable though? Like because of
I don't know if maybe inevitable is the right word, but you can definitely see the influence of the way he grew up, the way he was raised, the society that he lives in.
Right.
And like Marlon says, we all have to make choices based on that. Like, it's not like we don't have free will to fight against that, but that will push you in certain directions. And,
I think back to, like, in the second half of the show, anytime Anna Rose appears, you basically have people thinking, like, if she had not worked in the way... this woman was not born, if she did not, like, act in the way she did, then the Lowengram dynasty would not have risen because of, like, her impact on Reinhardt's choices.
Right.
And that, like, if she wasn't born, then, Friedrich would not have taken her as a concubine, and, like, even Friedrich was, like, only Kaiser because other person, he was, like, fourth in line or something, right?
Right. Like, I mean,
so
I guess it's like...
maybe I'm just not understanding the idea completely, because I guess I would just think if that didn't happen and Reinhardt just lived a normal, noble life, maybe there would have, like you said, what if Royenthal just became the great man? Like, you still need to have someone with a certain kind of, to use the classical way of meaning it, of virtue, some kind of leadership, of being able to take charge. Like, a certain part of prudence is knowing when to act, not just knowing how to act. And so, I would say that to be great is to understand what is contingently happening around you. That you can't just be a slave of contingency.
I guess I'm trying... So the thing I'm trying to make clear here is that historical contingency is not arguing for a predeterminist take on history. In fact...
The opposite.
Right, in fact, it is the opposite. Great man theory is the more determinist theory of history because it posits that history can only change because every few generations, great individuals are formed. I guess the way the 3-sentence summary, like, for historical contingency is more like it's the idea that every historical outcome is basically subject to a number of prior conditions, and that each one of those conditions is in turn dependent on other prior conditions, right? Like, to use an example, think about every time we talk about, like, how far back could, like, okay, how about this? Every time we try to talk about whose fault is it that such and such happens, right? How come we can go back a million, like, for example, whose fault is it that the FPA fell apart, right? Like, you could argue as late as when Yang did not fire on Reinhardt at Vermilion, right? Or you could go further back and say it's when
something Job Trudy did.
Right, something Job Trudy did. Or you go further back to when Andrew Fork was for some reason given command of the fleet during, like, the whole...
That dude refused to wake up Admiral Lobos when Bucock called in.
Right, that guy. Or you go even further back to when Yang won too good at Iserlohn. Or you go further back to when they assigned Yang to take Iserlohn in the first place. Or, the point... So, you get what I'm saying here, right? Like, the point is, like, you can't place blame or credit on any one singular person or event for why history eventually takes the shape it does. Historical contingency argues that
the way
history,
like, the situation where we are in is contingent on how many events.
Right. Like, there are a million factors that go into place, right? Like,
I guess I just don't see how that's different from a kind of a relativist, determinist way of looking at things.
Well, because Great Man Theory is arguing that, like, oh, those events specifically happened because great, powerful, important people made those decisions at those key moments. And I think it kind of, like, erases the reality that a lot of those key moments only happened because of a million other factors and other people making specific decisions. Like,
is this like does Alexander the Great become Alexander the Great if he's not handed his father's best army in the world?
Right. Like, I think that is a great example, right? Like, Alexander the Great, considered, one of the greatest, like, conquerors the world has ever known, one of the greatest military tacticians, blah, 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 right? But he did inherit his nation from Philip of Macedon, who did a lot of the work to get Alexander that power in the first place. And Philip of Macedon himself, like, emerges from... I don't have enough historical knowledge to get deep into the, like, context of Macedonian geopolitics at the time, but Philip of Macedon himself likely emerged from, his own, like, highly unique situation that, affected the decisions he made. And so the thing is, like, I guess if you're willing to expand great man into great, like, million theory, then maybe that's a little bit closer to the middle of what we're talking about here. But because Legend of the Galactic Heroes is a piece of fiction, right? We cannot see every single minor individual, like, and their contribution to history, but historical contingency is arguing that there are millions of those people, right? Like, there are millions of Forks and Schneiders and Schumachers that are making minor decisions that
one commander who let Mueller take his base without a fight to save lives, which allowed Mueller to get in the way in time at that one battle.
Right. Yeah, like, right, like that. Like, so the thing then comes down to, like, so that's a great example. So, like, yes, the commander whose name we cannot even remember, who lets Mueller win without a fight to save his own men, which, arguably a good and selfless choice, but leads to Mueller saving Reinhardt's life at the Battle of Vermilion. Does that commander count as a great man? Like, is he included in great man theory, or is he just the one of?
And as great as Reinhardt is, he had nothing to do with that.
Right, like, he had no ability to act on that information. He is saved by prior conditions that are being fulfilled by different, objectively less important individuals acting upon their own agency.
Just like I put this in my notes because one of the common criticisms of Legend of Galactic Heroes is that it supports great man theory by positing that Yang and Reinhardt are the two most important people like ever.
Things would be different without them there for sure. Like they had but I mean.
Yeah.
It's hard not to just then spin this into everything as chaos at this point, but
well, maybe it is.
Maybe it is. I don't know.
No, but I think it's but I think it's more like if Yang and Reinhardt were the only two people that mattered, like that whole situation would have turned out much differently, right? But like they are both like, I'm not going to say they are slaves to fate, but they are both like still reacting to a myriad of societal and individual factors that are forcing them to react and act in certain ways. But I don't know. I think the point of this is that, I think that I don't necessarily think that Legend of the Galactic Heroes is purely supporting great man theory. I think
Galactic Heroes,
it is a series undeniably about, for the most part, great men. Yes, it is about the Galactic Heroes. Unfortunately, not a lot of great women in the show. There's like 2, but I think that there is enough going on in Legend of the Galactic Heroes happening on the sides, happening on the periphery, that I don't think it is necessarily arguing that great individuals are the only people who have
was there a historical example you wanted to bring up, G, or
the direction of history? Not off the top of my head, no. I mean, because
this is time to empty the tank, so I figure.
No, I don't think for this one. No, I've mentioned a lot of things in the past, but I think that like these two emergent schools of thought on the way history goes, like you could bring up almost any historical event in history, and there are proponents on both sides who argue that why their specific school of thought is is the explainer on why this stuff happens. You know, if
And they're not even like necessarily antithetical to each other.
Right. I mean, if I was gonna bring up anything, I would probably bring up like, you know, I could, you know, I'm not gonna do it here because it would go on way too long. But you know, my favorite example for arguing in favor of historical contingency is the American Civil War. I think that the American Civil War is a perfect example of a lot of prior conditions and decisions being made by society as a whole compounding on each other, leading to kind of an inevitable critical mass. Yeah, I will say inevitable critical mass that kind of blows up in the 1860s in the form of the American Civil War. Like, I think that war more than anything, that conflict more than any, is a very strong counter-argument to great man theory. You know, because, like, try as you might, like, to argue that, like, like, it's all about Abraham Lincoln or blah, blah, blah. Like, these specific people are why this war happens. It is generations of specific decisions being made that compound on each other.
If it wasn't Lincoln, it probably would have been somebody else at some point in the same time period.
Yes. And, like, you know, a lot of it is, you know, like, goes all the way to the 1700s itself. The part where the Founding Fathers wrote the Declaration of Independence and were like, but we're still keeping slaves. Like,
3/5
and, you know, that goes even further back to... Right, that goes... Yeah, stuff like the 3/5 compromise, things like Andrew Jackson's actions during the annulment crisis. Like, believe me, I could get really deep into this, but my point is I think that specific, like, historical event is a great example of, like, yes, there are definitely historical... Like, I'm not taking away from specific individuals making specific decisions during those a century and a half. But... That's just a century. But many of that are just events and conditions compounding on each other that kind of lead it down a certain direction because of individual actors numbering in the millions more than the dozens who are affecting those events. Anyways, it's funny how we all thought this was going to be a 90-minute podcast, and we're like,
yeah,
let's Galactic Heroes, baby.
Here.
Yeah.
But it is time for us to move on to our next topic, which I'm sure will be no less contentious than the last one.
We kind of started
which,
touching on this a little bit, I think,
yeah.
but
yeah. Yes, but I don't know if we are seriously going to try to answer this, but this is our hot take talking point to get this one started. What is the show's final position on which side won and which side was in the right? Which side? What is the message of Legend of the Galactic Heroes? Which political theory is Legend of the Galactic Heroes advocating for? At the
Maybe
end
I shouldn't have put this on the note.
all right. So
frankly, I think this is already
fair,
a loaded
yes.
question.
I mean, plot-wise, Reinhardt won, right? But
Right.
Yes,
we're not fighting
that.
But the question is, ideologically speaking, is the show? Did anybody even win? I think is the big question.
Yeah, I'm kind of thinking.
Which I don't know if you can say that, but
I'm kind of thinking like back to what you were talking about, Reinhardt saying, yeah, if anyone could, you know, if my baby turns out to be a loser, you can overthrow him, and like you guys are saying, that he kind of loses right there.
Let's go.
Like he had it, and then he fumbles at the 1 yard line or something like that.
drop the football at the.
Yeah, I mean, a lot could be said about the last half of season 4 is kind of Reinhardt just...
Let me declare that the leader must always stand at the front.
Right,
like just kind of fumbling it in a myriad of ways there towards the very end. Like, don't get me, like, here's the thing, right? Reinhardt still wins the game with like a 14-point difference, but like, it's more like Reinhardt was winning that game like 30-7. And then suddenly he fumbles hard enough that Julian is able to like run that up to like 24-30 or something. It's like
he scored a touchdown, but he like did some really flagrant foul in front of the ref and gets kicked out of the next game.
Like it's like as soon as Yang got that crippling knee injury at the halftime point, that was Reinhardt's game to win. Like, fucking, they're bringing on the fresh quarterback, Julian, you know, like, he's kind of unproven. And everybody's like, oh, this is going to be a slaughter. Like, but Reinhardt lets Julian close that game up a little closer than he should have.
Or maybe to, like, go back to the 7-Eleven analogy, like, he beats up the FPA, but he accidentally throws one of them into the glass of the 7-Eleven, and he's banned from getting any Slurpees for the future.
This is getting very elaborate.
I think the point of this whole topic, as I don't think any of us here are legitimately going to sit here and try to litigate who was right.
I also added
Legend
this
of the
topic
Galactic
because
Heroes,
I saw a not insignificant amount of criticism for the show, claiming that it supports like fascist ideals.
Yeah, I don't think you can really make an argument that it's supporting fascism.
Right.
I think it's presenting the strengths and weaknesses of both sides, as I've said before. I think the criticism...
I've also seen criticism that it takes a weak, both sides might have a point stance.
Yes, and I think that's a more interesting question, because, you know, especially in our very polarized political times right now, if you don't take a position, then that's taking a position in itself.
Pick one of those communist or fascist things or fuck off.
Right.
So
I can see why that's a more interesting question, because it is showing good and bad on both sides, which is a level of nuance that is kind of impossible right now. But how
much of a pass do we give it because this is from the 80s?
Well, it's not so much that, because, like we said, what's happening in Legend of the Galactic Heroes is timeless. I just think those conversations are difficult to have because of the atmosphere we're living in, where they're kind of just not helpful right now. Mm-hmm. But I think you guys have said this before. I don't know if we've had a chance to all talk about it. I do think the show takes a stand on saying, you know, whatever's good for the people is the best way to go, right?
Yes.
And perhaps it's saying it's not as easy to accomplish that as it sounds. both pathways have a way to do it, and
there's many times in history where the people do not choose what's best for them.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Or on the flip side, if you're in a monarchy, then you probably more often than not get, mediocre to bad rulers, right?
Yeah.
With no reliable way to get rid of them.
Yeah.
So I think the show does make it clear that whatever is going to be best and most beneficial for the people and not the upper class should be the goal. I don't know if it really takes a strong it's not even about taking a stand. I don't know. It might just be saying we don't really have the best answer. Maybe that's what it's trying to say.
Right.
There's no perfect solution for that.
Yeah, and I would go as far as say that I agree with what you said, Jill, that in this, in the modern, zeitgeist of fiction, that taking a neutral stand is kind of a no-go. But I would go as far as say that I think that you can still write a fairly nuanced story, a fairly quote unquote politically neutral.
Well, you can do it. Just everyone's going to be mad at you.
Story.
But
well, but the thing is, I think it could still be done well even in 2020. I mean, I think that Legend of the Galactic Heroes is a good, again, in scare quotes, politically neutral story that still reverberates and it still feels relevant.
In as much as these days, when a character says you should protect the people and give welfare, etc., can be considered a politically neutral statement.
I mean, yeah, so that is the thing, right? I think Jell kind of starts to get at that, and I think Iro, you and I have talked about this in the past, I think, specifically in the episode where Jan and Reinhardt meet in person for the first time, is that the story honestly, like, I don't know how neutral it actually is, because yes, it's not intrinsically about one form of government being superior to the other, but in the way that it is arguing that all political systems are essentially formats through which individuals try to exert and restrict power over society as a whole, and how each type has its own myriad, issues which can be exploited, that at the end of the day, Legend of the Galactic Heroes is still making the pretty strong argument that human history as a whole is about the imperfect pursuit of the ideal society by which we can give as much welfare, security, and liberty to the people that exist in it. Right? At the end of the day, Yang and Reinhard, what they differ on is on the methods through which to achieve the ideal society. But at their core, both agree that there are things that human beings fundamentally deserve. They fundamentally deserve their dignity. They fundamentally deserve welfare. They deserve a right to exist and not to struggle, right? Yes, even Reinhardt, who is all in on his specific brand of Darwinism, still fundamentally thinks that the average person does not deserve to suffer, right? At the core of his being, he believes that his society is the most expedient way to eliminate human suffering. Whereas, Yang believes that democracy is the most realistically stable way to achieve that. And at the end of the day, so I don't think, that's why I used scare quotes before, I don't think Legend of the Galactic Heroes is that politically neutral. I think it actually takes a really strong stand that these are the these are the things worth killing for, right? At the end of the day, right, this is what Hans Yang, right, is this is worth killing people for at the end of the day, right? Liberty, democracy, the right for people to self-determine, versus Reinhard, who's this conquest is worth it because this is the quickest way to ensure the widespread welfare and happiness of the people who exist in my nation, right?
Because in Reinhardt's case, he comes to power destroying the
status quo,
the nobility, the ruling class that is taking advantage of the people, and that's technically good,
right?
Yes,
we can talk about methods or whatever, but the end goal of like you said, making sure that the average person is benefiting from
that.
Your success.
That is an interesting thing, I think, about the show quote unquote presenting both sides, is that when both sides are agreeing on certain things, that ends up being the stance of the show as a whole, and that's what needs to be compared with reality, I guess, as opposed to the Empire won, therefore they must be in the right, which
right.
I think anybody who's looking at the actual to go back to this analogy, I think anybody who's looking at the actual score of the game as an endorsement of one political ideology over the other is interpreting the source material pretty shallowly. That's a pretty shallow take on what Legend of the Galactic Heroes is saying.
Because like Marlon alluded to, we end, even though Reinhardt quote unquote won, there's a lot of holes in the Empire at the end of the show that who knows what's going to happen 5-10 years from then. So it's not like it's just making that one definitive statement like we're saying.
Right. Because at the end of the day, I think, obviously, people will take from Legend of the Galactic Heroes what they want to, right? I think most of us here who largely believe that despite its myriad flaws, that a liberal democracy is still worth defending, are going to come with a takeaway that, the FPA goes through some real bad times, but, there's a reason why Yang fights for it so hard. Whereas I think anybody out there who is going to have, autocratic or monarchist leanings, is going to look at Legend of the Galactic Heroes and be like, ah, that's what we need, a real life Reinhard von Lohengrin. And
without acknowledging the criticisms that the show is also presenting.
Right. I mean, at the end of the day, I think if there's anything Legend of the Galactic Heroes, like, if there's any stance Legend of the Galactic Heroes actually has, it's that autocracies are really easy to fuck up, but also really easy to unfuck up, and democracies are really hard to fuck up, but really hard to fix.
Various forms of government have various pros and cons.
Yes. Right. That is like the real message at the end of the day. And it's like, and at the end of the day, it's like basically asking you, the viewer, like, which is worth the pros despite, their undeniable cons.
Yeah, and I think just going back to the question of, like, can you write a work like this that explores the nuance of both sides, so to speak, without being, just, completely neutral or whatever. I think
right.
It's just a tribute to, and I wanted to say this at some point, Yoshiki Tanaka's real brilliance is his insight into how human beings work. And he's able to look at history and his own observations and be able to introduce the nuance based on things that have really happened and patterns that we've seen that you can't argue with it, right? It's like you look at it and you're like, yep, that's what happens. and his level of, like, understanding of how human beings work, I think is the real star of the show, and how he can pull off something like this.
That's applicability.
Yeah. Because I think for better or worse, it's like, even even as a quote-unquote diehard democracy stan, right? It's like, as somebody who has studied history and have read about great kings and rulers, like, rapidly affecting great changes in their societies, I get it. I get the appeal. And I think that is, like, kind of what Legend of the Galactic Heroes does so well, is, like, it's just like, look, this is how these political systems work. Here are their weaknesses. Here are their strengths. Like, it's kind of up to you to have your takeaway on what is the one that is, like, worth fighting for.
It's going to come down to what the person sees as the highest good.
Yeah. And, I mean, but even then, that's a weird thing, right? Because
we can all agree that people deserve welfare and not to starve and not to suffer under the yoke of an upper class.
Right, like, it and I think that is why we do say that show does have a stance, because it does have a stance on what is good for society. What it is more neutral on is what is the best way to achieve it.
This is why it's interesting to watch this show now, because I wonder if in 1980, if 30 years ago, if a stance like that would have been as politically charged.
Also, I'm thinking good is, like, you can see in the Empire.
I think
like, honor is so much more valued than in the FPA, and how that does affect the way their society is structured.
Mm-hmm.
And
I mean, that's kind of like, I'm sorry to relitigate our prior argument, but isn't that a great argument in favor of Roenthal being a victim of historical contingency? Like, if this sort of weird miscommunication thing ever happened in the FPA, Yang would just be like, hey, sorry, that wasn't supposed to happen, might be. But in the Empire, both Reinhard and Roenthal are like, well, I won't apologize unless he says sorry first. And it's like, this could have been solved if just one of you had the pride to bend the knee and be like, my bad. But that is such an ingrained part of Empire culture, right? Like, honor, the proper way of doing things.
Yeah.
Right.
But anyways.
I mean, the highest good is still going to be a little bit different for everyone, to a certain extent. Like, you can see how, like, Mittermeier, he still has honor, but the way his honor, how it shapes his admiralty, it's a lot different from Roenthal's, because there's a pride in Roenthal that really doesn't seem to be as strong in Mittermeier. And
right, Mittermeier offered to drop all his titles and everything to stop what was happening.
In many ways, you could almost argue Mittermeier and Roenthal are meant to represent like good honor and toxic honor, I guess, right? Like if you ask me, I would definitely say Mittermeier is the far more honorable individual, specifically because what is more honorable than willing to throw away all of your honor in the name of like saving your best
There was
friend,
that time
right?
he was going to cap
Like-
Lang.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, look, nobody's perfect. And also, what is more honorable than
shooting Lang in
gunning
the
a
face?
fascist in
Yeah,
the
I don't know.
street?
But,
What is more honorable than a fascist gunning down another fascist?
I get what you're saying, G, though.
But that's what I mean. Whereas I would say Reuenthal's honor manifested in a far more toxic manner, right? Like Reuenthal's sense of honor almost never
Right.
does him any good. Like, the only time it ever does him any good is when he shoots Job Trunick, and he's like, "On my honor, this is the thing to do." But yeah, I definitely get what you're saying, Marlon. I mean, I think that is why the conflict still happens, right? Like, I said that they agree that fundamental goods are like welfare and happiness and like all of that, but like I think a difference is that, for example, Jan would say in addition to all those, liberty is also worth dying for, whereas Reinhardt would be like, I don't think I agree on that.
why does that matter if everybody has bread,
Right.
right? Like, yeah.
Right. Like, that's a key difference. And that, like, something as quote-unquote minor as that is why motherfuckers start throwing asteroids at each other.
Right.
Yang will throw an asteroid at your face in the name of personal liberty. So, you know, maybe that's where the differences occur.
Yeah.
With that, I think, taken care of, I think we're going to maybe skip the next topic we have written here,
Yeah.
because I
I
think
think
we
that's
kind of
fair.
already talked about it.
Yup.
So we are instead going to move on to, I don't know if I'd call these the more fun topics, maybe just the topics that are more victim to random tangents, but we're going to start talking to more like just our personal, like, you know, feelings as fans of this show and the things we want to talk about. So the next topic we have here is, what single scene do you wish happened in Legend of the Galactic Heroes that didn't? And then, in addition to that, if you could change one thing about Legend of the Galactic Heroes, what would it be? So the first is, what is a single canonical scene that you wish had happened in the show? And the second is, if you could retcon Legend of the Galactic Heroes in any way, you know, short of giving it an extra season or just fixing the entirety of Season 4, what would you retcon about Legend of the Galactic Heroes?
I've been saying this the entire show, but I really wanted a scene where Bukak and Markatz would have a conversation. You could make the argument they're basically the same character.
Honorable old guy,
But
my country, right or wrong.
Right. Because they are, like, so similar, I would have been interested to see
Yeah,
a
I
conversation
think
between them.
There could have been some really interesting conversations between the old guard. Like,
Yeah, because they both kind of represent
Right.
time periods that have passed at this point, right? They're still they're you know, the old FPA and the old Empire, right?
yeah. I mean, I would have been really interested
Exactly.
because, you know, for all we know, I mean, I don't know, maybe the Gaiden series explains this, or maybe there's a footnote about this in the books, but there is a, like, not insignificant likelihood that Bukak and Murkatz maybe even fought each other before. Like, they're both
Right.
veterans of,
Exactly.
like, old conflicts between their respective nations. Like,
Right. And then sitting down to talk after
who
all
could
that
say?
would be very interesting.
yeah, I mean, like, shit, I was reading, like, just some, like, minor thing on the fucking incomprehensibly, like, deep Legend of the Galactic Heroes wiki about, like, some shit Bukak did back in the old day.
Oh,
And
I'm glad I haven't dove into that thing.
And I'm like, damn, I would like to see an episode about that. Like,
I heard he shows up as a young gunner in a Gaiden episode.
oh man, that's good. Fucking young
that increases
Bukak.
my motivation to watch Gaiden.
Yeah, we gotta get it. Okay, anyways. So that's your
one day.
scene.
Yes.
I think for me,
And
for your retcon, yes.
No, go. Maybe this is a cheap shot, but if Jessica Edwards didn't die ignoble
Yeah,
death,
no, I could see that.
like 12 episodes did or whatever, like that could have changed a lot. Or it could have given us a lot of interesting scenes. I think, like character stuff with Yang, and I think it would have upped the stakes for keeping the FPA alive. At least like on a personal character level,
because for better or worse, Yang is kind of a tragic hero, right? Like he is fighting and dying to save the memory of a nation that frankly does not even care for him that much, right?
Like when it's like down to whether he shoots Reinhardt or saves the FPA, and he chooses to save the FPA, like we take that entirely upon the ideology of Yang Wenli, and if like there had been time for, say, Jessica Edwards to like create meaningful reform on some level, that might have upped the narrative stakes.
Yeah, I mean,
I don't know if it would have necessarily been better on a tonal level, but on like a thematic level,
I think that like saving Jessica Edwards doesn't necessarily hurt the show as a whole. I do think. I mean, I think the show as we know it would be a very different show, but a show in which Jessica Edwards is alive, I think does. But I mean, it adds a potential depth that was not there prior, and so I think that is like a good and interesting retcon.
So, I really could not think of anything that I would want to put on screen that was off screen, so to speak. But as far as like retconning, and I've said this before, but I just wanted to expand on it a bit. I wanted to see what happened if Kirky Ice lived.
I mean,
the biggest retcon of
that
all.
is like the obvious,
but I mean specifically because he had his internal conflict that was starting to brew right before he died. Like, I remember the one bit with his inner monologue where he's like, "Well, what are you gonna do, Kirky Ice? What are you gonna do, Sig?" Well, he actually uses his first name because I think he hates being called Kirky Ice, which is part of my my whole theory that he's not really as close with Reinhardt as Reinhardt is close with him. But what?
Right, he's like, I'm sure Reinhardt will come to his senses soon.
Like, what would have happened if he had, everybody, we mentioned the joke of, everyone saying, if only Kirky Ice was here. Well, what if Kirky Ice was here? Would Reinhardt have actually continued to listen to him? Would there have been some kind of breaking point where Kirky Ice's own ideals would not have allowed him to continue doing what Reinhardt was telling him to do? Which was the kind of the conflict that was starting to come up right before he died. Because I always felt like he was really so devoted to Reinhardt because of Anna Rose, right? I mean, is that fair to think about? Think in that direction at least.
I think that Kirky Ice genuinely was a friend to Reinhardt, but I see where you're coming from.
But it was he. I don't think he thought of Reinhardt the same way Reinhardt thought of him. Like, it's not that I don't think he cared.
I don't think would Kirky Ice keep a locket with
Reinhardt's hair in it, right?
Reinhardt's hair.
Yeah, I don't. It's not that I don't think he cared or wasn't Reinhardt's friend, but I don't think. Let's put it this way: I think there's more of a chance of Reinhardt or Kirky Ice influencing Reinhardt's ideals than the other way around.
Yes, I mean, I think that the reason why people say Kirky Ice had to die when he does is because I hear this from a lot of people that say that Kirky Ice's situation in Legend of the Galactic Heroes, not even in the Empire itself, but in the narrative itself, is untenable by the end of Season 1. Because if you really put a gun to my head and say which is stronger, Kirky Ice's ideals or his loyalty to Reinhardt, I think Kirky Ice sticks by his ideals before his loyalty to Reinhardt. And if Reinhardt were to do some of the things he does in later seasons, I don't think Kirky, the nicest version I see of that relationship is that Kirky Ice probably just resigns, right? Like
then Oberstein makes him drink poisoned wine.
Right. And I think
I think that Kirky Ice would not take Reinhardt's he would not tolerate Reinhardt's actions. Think about how many wars Reinhardt starts that he doesn't need to, right? Kirky Ice would never stand for Reinhardt letting like the whole letting Erwin Josef escape to the FPA as a casus belli for starting the war, right? Kircheis would be disgusted by that kind of like backroom dealing, and he would probably the least like violent, the least confrontational like conclusion of that friendship is probably just he resigns out of protest.
Right. And what kind of effect would that have on Reinhardt? Like those are like all things I think would have been really cool to explore. There's a lot of interesting angles to take on that.
Right, because like at the end of the day, Reinhardt, even like even up to Kircheis' death, like and beyond that, you could tell many of his actions are motivated by that subconscious desire to like impress and live up to Kircheis' ideals.
Right.
And what happens if Kircheis is... And the problem, though, with that is, of course, that, like, as time goes on, Kircheis, as they said what will happen to Yang Wenli, happen to Kircheis. Kircheis increasingly becomes less of a person and more of an ideal.
Right.
And what happens to a Reinhardt regime in which Kircheis is still there? And, like, it's hard to say, like, where... Like, because we had so little time with Kircheis, for better or worse, like, even we kind of treat him as an ideal more than a character. Like, it's hard to say. Would Kircheis have, like... Would he have, like, started, like, peaceful protests on Heidessen? Like, if Reinhardt starts, like, doing some really, like, ratchet, warmongering shit, would Kircheis, like, denounce Reinhardt? Like, I'm not saying, like, start a rebellion, but, like, would would Kircheis go on the news and be like, I denounce the actions of Reinhard von Lohengrin?
I mean,
like,
going even further, like, if Kircheis made it that far, would he have had Rorienthal's position? Probably, right? In being the second in command and taking over Neuland, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like,
assuming,
how would that have played out with all the, there's a lot of potential, ways that it could have gone with all that I think would have been very interesting.
Totally.
So,
I mean, also, I think the sad truth is that, like, if Kircheis was around, like, I don't think Yang makes it as far as he does in the show, because getting, like, let's be honest, like, I mean, I love Yang, but Yang manages to get a sucker punch on a Reinhardt that is entirely by himself, like, at Vermilion. Like, a Reinhardt that has Kircheis there to double team Yang, I don't know if...
Yeah, maybe that all ends a lot quicker.
Right.
Yang's good. I don't know if he's, like, I mean, for better or worse, we never see Yang and Kircheis actually fight each other in a fair fight. So, we don't know. We just have the implications that Kircheis is a Reinhardt tier
like
commander.
Yang's whole plan was that he was taking out lower admirals in order to draw Reinhardt out, but Reinhardt could always just feel Kircheis instead, if that was the case.
Right, like, the Lennenkampfs and the Lennenkampfs and the Kempf and the
Farron or
Kempf?
Sure, Kempf, yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember the...
Kempf was at Geiersburg Fortress.
Yes, okay, so I was thinking of him. So yeah, like the Lennenkampfs and Kempfs of the world that Reinhardt initially sends after Yang Wenli, if he just sends Kircheis, Kircheis is not going to fall for an asteroid being thrown at his face. Probably.
He'll use his directional Zephyr particles to counter
the Kircheis special.
Right, Kircheis and his bullshit... Right? Yeah, Zephyr particles that, for some reason, no other commander thinks of using every single time.
Yeah. So, I just think that would open up a lot of interesting conflicts that we didn't get to see.
Yeah.
And, instead we kind of got, after his death, Reinhardt's power consolidated, and no one really... I mean, you could say the Ruhenthal Rebellion, but nobody really challenges his... or questions his, decisions after that point.
Right, because nobody even has the closeness to do that. Like, by the very end of the show, Hilda...
Yeah, I guess Hilda does, but, like, she doesn't have the same...
Well, yes, but let's be real. Hilda...
still overrides her, like, all the time.
Right, like, Hilda, even by the end of the show, Hilda, like, literally married to Reinhardt, I would argue still does not even hold a candle to the influence Kircheis did on Reinhardt in Season 1. Like Hilda can make Reinhardt stop. Like, Kircheis can make Reinhardt, like, entirely reconsider his decisions.
Right.
Like at most, Hilda can make Reinhardt be like, "Oh, did I do a bad?"
Make him think about it, but right.
She'll make him think about it, yeah. But like, it's Kirkeyes who will actually get Reinhardt to like really consider the direction he's going in.
I guess that's part of why it was interesting right before he dies, because he does confront Reinhardt, and Reinhardt kind of goes off on him. That's like the one time he doesn't listen to him, right? So like, what was gonna? And
I think that's what makes it so interesting is the implications of like what would that relationship look like going forward.
Would they have patched it up, or would that have gone bad, or I don't know. There's so many ways to go from that. I mean, so
for all we know, it goes extreme as a Burkett situation where like, Kirkeyes sees Reinhardt and Oberstein hiring dudes like Lang, and Kirkeyes is just like, you know what, fuck it, I'm out.
I mean, that's the thing though. Like, but I couldn't really see him leaving.
I'm gonna go
either,
join
so
Yang
like,
and
I don't know what would
Iserlohn.
happen. That's
maybe, but that's the thing is like we don't know. Like, it's hard to tell. It's like what would have been the breaking point for Kirkeyes? Like, would it have been Lang? Would it have been Erwin Yosef? Would it have been the murder of what's a dude's the Marquis, whose family like all the boys under the age of 10 get to live.
Littenheim.
Like, how would Kirkeyes have felt about the whole like kill all the boys over the age of 10? Like, I don't think Kirkeyes stands for that. I think even something like that, I think like that's a breaking point for Kirkeyes. Like.
Or would Reinhardt even do that if Kirkeyes were here? Again, that's the question we can't answer.
It's hard, yeah. And, I mean, I think we talk about this because this is you just went for the easy, biggest possible retcon.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Like, I might as well say my option is, well, what if Yang lives?
I actually don't. I don't think that would be the same, though.
Really? You don't think, no?
Would Yang really have been able to reverse what happens at that point?
I think we would have just skipped season 4 and ended up with
Indy. Maybe, yeah. I mean, they were kind of gesturing towards that anyways, but I do think that if Yang had been around, like, people would have come to the table more.
I mean, I'm not saying it wouldn't have made any difference, but
than...
I think that it would have had less impact at the point that he dies in the story.
True.
So... well, I'm sorry I picked an obvious one. I just think it's
maybe
an interesting one.
Well, okay.
Yeah. So
sure,
I think mine won't be quite as controversial. So the scene would simply be, I wish we kind of had kind of like one of the historical flashback episodes to have a setting for the politics of the FPA. Just to have it would be interesting.
Oh, yeah, because like we only get how they left the Empire, and we jump like 150 years later, and the
like
FPA is here.
How it got built up, and then maybe a little bit more context for Trunich's rise, and at least like the kind of the governing coalition that brings about Trunich and some of these other members of the FPA.
The political thriller version of the FPA that takes place 15 to 20 years before right now. Even.
I mean, I would be willing to go even further back, because I think the thing that dogs the FPA the whole show, and the reason why people can come away from the show in the first place being like, you know what, enlightened monarchy is the way to go, is that we never get a chance to see the FPA in its best moment, right? Like, it's obviously implied that the FPA had a high moment before, right? Like, they kind of imply in the backstory that the first time the Empire and the FPA met each other, the FPA like
dunked on them,
savagely beat the fuck out of the Empire, and so the implication is that once upon a time the FPA was on top of its shit. Like,
they go from a couple 100,000 to a couple billion in a span of 150 years. That's
clearly they were making some of the right choices, but we don't really know what those are. And again, I think it's easy to dunk on the FPA because they are around for longer, but I think it is always good to remember that we actually witnessed the death of two nations in Legend of the Galactic Heroes, like both the FPA and the Golden Bomb Dynasty. It's just easier to forget about the Golden Bomb Dynasty because they get wiped out so quickly. But like, look, let me put it this way. Not to go both sides of them here, but as bad as the FPA is, they never fired on their own guys while retreating.
Yeah, the old Empire was also very bad.
Right, like, we see both political we see both political systems at their worst moments. The problem is that we never see one of them at their best. Like, we see what an enlightened monarchy looks like at its best, but we never see democracy at its finest moment. And Marlon, I'm actually kind of glad you brought that up, because, you know, like, if you asked me right now, what is the actual political system of the FPA? I don't think I could tell you, other than it's a democracy.
That kind of leads into the thing I'd like to change. Like, it's not directly related, but it's like, it just kind of shows that the writer, he has some certain skills and maybe not so much in other places. So for me, I kind of wish there was more realistic economics to the way this world functions. You get kind of the one little lip service to it in how the supply lines get strained in the invasion of Empire territory, but for the most part, the entire show kind of functions with, literally, there does seem to be this magic jar of people and resources that keeps coming out to fund these wars.
Well, they do touch on the.
You get the lip service with Labello, where he's like, we have no more specialists to work on civilian stuff.
And I mean, even in the Empire, they do start to mention that, like, it is going through a weird brain drain because, like, like, what's his name? Silverburst, or not Silverburst?
I think it might be Silverburst.
Maybe it was Silverburst, but, like, there was definitely, like, some, like, lower level Empire bureaucrats who were like, hey, these wars are starting to add up in cost, and, like, it is beginning to affect the domestic area.
Right,
like,
they pay the lip service.
But you're
to
right.
What you're saying.
Yeah.
It's like the barest of lip service. We don't even begin to see the consequences.
A big thing to see, like, because they always talk about how Fazan is this big economic powerhouse, and one would assume that the reason they are an economic powerhouse is that they're able to receive goods from both sides and then trade them within each other. Because, you know, basically, you can think of, like, Singapore. You know, Singapore, what it has going for it is its location. It's its hub of trade. And so,
yes,
if you just take over a hub of trade and you are at war with the other, like, it just seems like there would be so many cascading consequences to the capture of Fazan that don't really come up. Like, there's a little bit of a lip service to it, but it doesn't seem like it's as extreme as it would be.
Right.
I think part of it might be that the show's timeline is actually, like, incredibly short, considering the magnitude of
but
events.
then you look at
the like, all the shit
2008
happens in the
financial
span of-
crisis.
Yeah. No,
and
I'm not
see
disagreeing
just,
with
like,
you.
how quickly financial downturn can spiral out of control on a global scale.
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm really glad you brought this up, Marlon, because, like, you actually, like, do bring up some very good points about, like, it would be like, right, because, like, taking over Fazan would be like the equivalent of, like, I don't know, yeah, like, trying to militarily
Like
occupy
Geneva or
like
Singapore, yeah.
Singapore or Switzerland or something, right? It's like, okay, great, you control it, but, like, who are you trading now with, right? Like, the value of that place was not its material resource; it was its, like, value as its connections. And if you take it over, there goes the connections. I mean, hell, you can even argue, wait, it's a trading hub between two nations that are constantly at war with each other. Like, how much, like, intergalactic trade is actually happening between the two? Like, what does the Empire and the FPA export to each other?
Yeah.
Like,
and I mean, from the Empire's point of view, by the time they take Fazan, they figure, well, we're taking their FPA stuff anyway, right? So, like,
Right.
right.
I don't know, but
so, like, at most, what you would get from taking over Fazan is, like, any immediate, like, financial stores they have in their banks at the time.
Right.
But, like, you wouldn't, like, it would not be, like, it would not continue to make you money, I guess. But I'm not an economist.
And
I can't say, you know, like, I think that, right, and I think that the conquering of Fazan was also more like its geographic location as much as its as its, like, trade value.
Yeah, because it was necessary in order to invade. Right.
Yeah, right. Like, I think economics is a hard thing to get into. Like, even logistics is tough for most writers.
And then you're working on literally a galactic scale.
Yeah, like,
the numbers are already absurd.
Right. I think you have a good point, Marlon. I just think it's like, for better or worse, the framework of the show cannot afford to spend episodes on, like, this is how the FPA gets its food, you know, this
Right.
is what they export and import, like at most you can kind of just pay lip service to like, oh, it is our loan, we only have 400,000 men and 10,000 ships.
Not every
and,
story can be about
you know,
how killing giant
that sort of thing.
lobsters helps support the war economy, that kind of stuff.
And like it leads
Yeah.
to long-term destruction of the environment.
Sorry, that was a deep cut.
Okay,
That
well,
was Stormlight for you listeners.
all right, well, since I'm going last, I'm going to give the cop out of you guys kind of started to already get into like what I was going to say, what I want to see more of, which was like FPA backstory, but kind of related to that, I think I would have liked, related to both that and like your Jessica Edwards thing, Iro, I think I would have just liked to have seen more of like ground level society in Legend of the Galactic Heroes. Like, you know, we see the
The like
protests.
FPA side of the like party episode or whatever.
Yeah, like we see the protest, we see like guys in Fazan bars talking about whatever, but like you never actually really kind of get to see the day-to-day of like how the actual people are dealing with all this, right? Like this is an extremely tumultuous time to live in if you are just like a regular citizen in Legend of the Galactic Heroes. Like at most, you kind of see a little bit of it, like in that episode where the Empire occupies Heinessen, and like all the like low-level D-tier bureaucrats are like obscuring or obfuscating like the
that was
Empire's like.
And it was a really good moment.
Right,
also.
right. Like, hey, you didn't fill out like D Form 68 or something. It's like
I need
that's
you
great.
to submit proof that you're the let's see, Galactic Empire. Galactic
Right,
Emperor.
like that stuff is great, and I would have loved to have seen more of that like low level stuff. And I think this kind of relates to also like, you know, Marlon talking about wanting to see more of the economy. I think for better or worse, I don't think the stuff I'm asking for could be in the show because it just doesn't have time for that. But more that stuff I would have loved to have seen, like, because like, you know, even stuff like Yang's popularity is hard to gauge because like we kind of only see it through the lens of like either the people immediately around Yang Wenli or the political figures who hate Yang Wenli. Like, you know, like we saw that one protest where people have like you know signs
Right.
with Yang Wenli's face on it. But like, how do the people as a whole feel about him? Right?
And that was
like,
even after
what
he
is
died,
what's the
right?
man?
Like,
Right, and became a
Right.
martyr. But like day to day, like, what do people feel about the hero of Alpha Seal? Like you think that like motherfucker who even before the show has started is already known as the hero of Alpha Seal, like winner of the Battle of Iserlohn,
I'll bet.
stops the coup, like
right, I
does
mean,
all
like
this fucking great-
the government dudes were trying to tear him down because he was getting too popular, right?
right, but we never see
Yeah,
that
like,
really. Like,
Right. We are told that
That
that's
could have been
the case.
interesting because I would imagine he was a very polarizing figure prior to him dying.
Right,
So
totally.
that would
I
have been
mean-
interesting seeing his, you know, how he fit into political discussions at the time. Because I'm
Yeah.
sure they,
Man.
yeah, I'm sure people either loved him or hated him, right?
Yeah, boy, you want to you talk about like a you know a polarized political situation now. I want to know, what people are saying on this, what are people saying on Twitter about Yang Wenli? Like, you know, like when his name is trending on Twitter, like is it because of something good or something bad? Like, I don't
Some
know.
like, what would people in the Civil War think about Grant?
Right? Yeah. Like yes. Yes. Asking people during the
Yeah, or
Civil War.
Sherman.
Yes, or Sherman. Yes, William Tecumseh Sherman. Like, what are your T Sherman
Right.
takes? Like.
Hashtag gonna take.
Yeah.
About-
Now, what's your feeling about hashtag? What was it
March
road
to the Sea. Like,
road to Shandanoa or
Yeah,
whatever?
like, I just think about we kind of see hints of there being sort of like a extremist right wing type of thing going on with like the Patriotic Night
Yeah,
Corps
right.
and stuff like that. Like, so I maybe things were not too much different than now, maybe to a more extreme level,
Yeah, I
but
mean-
very polarized. You know,
Maybe just
would've
like
been interesting, but
maybe just like the modern landscape of mainstream news. Maybe every time Yang does something good, the media tries to minimize it, and anytime a picture of him like drunk or playing with a cat gets like tons of like
God.
coverage about like This man,
look how lazy this bastard is. Yeah.
Young Wenli is liquor store bills leaked.
right? Like this man is wasting your tax dollars on Iserlohn playing with this cat.
On Alpha Seal whiskey. It was all a conspiracy. They saved Alpha Seal.
Hashtag whiskey.
Right.
Alpha Seal
Like-
whiskey.
Just like purposefully misconstrue his actions against him.
That's too real.
Which makes me,
real.
like, this is just, I had this thought that it's probably broadly a good thing that I do not, like, even know who is at the top of our military right now.
It's one of the virtues
there's
of
not,
the American
like-
military system.
Not that there
Well-
aren't major military operations happening right now, but nothing so big that it would
There's
be
not
affecting my
one guy
day-to-day
that's
life.
like in charge of army aside from
Yeah.
the president, unfortunately. But
Well, it's also
Okay, well, that's a
because,
whole other can of
you know,
worms.
in our current presidency, the one guy who is in charge of army is a fucking revolving
Right.
door.
that's
So-
also true. Yeah.
Like I could have told you who was there about 2 years ago, not anymore. But,
Oh boy.
But yeah, as for my retcon, now I don't think this is controversial. I think that what they did was the right move, and you know, I think we can all agree. You know, Bucock's Toast to Democracy, one of the greatest scenes in that show, right? Like, you want to talk like top 5 scenes of all time. It's Bucock's Toast to Democracy at the end.
You're gonna
of,
take this away from us?
the battle of the second battle of Mars Detta, right, where he's there with Chung,
Something like
and you know, they're like, you know, blah blah blah, like democracy means I can be friends with my subordinate. Can you say the same? I like that one commenter who said his headcanon was that
Alexander
that-
Siegfried is named after Bucock.
yes, that actually, like, Reinhardt secretly held Bucock in such deep esteem, which is which is so good. I don't even call that headcanon. I prefer to term that as real, because Bucock's
That old
the
man
best.
was like the purest
Right.
spring water.
Yes, right, like all that, like right, like actually, Reinhardt did start to say like a lot of like almost Kirkias-esque things about Bucock there toward the end. The man was the purest spring water of democracy or whatever, like, but I wouldn't want to impugn on the sanctity of that scene, but I think it would have been interesting if they found a way to save Chung.
Yes.
Oh, hell yeah.
I'm on board with that.
I think it is fitting, but I also think
The
it is a
sandwich
little
was so stale, it blocked a bullet.
Yes, so how that works, I don't know, but I think it's just I think it's fitting, but also a little bit tragic that I realized Chung, who was like actually like low key one of Yang Wenli's biggest advocates, never actually met the guy. Like, right? Like, Chung is the one who's like, actually, we need Yang to abandon Iserlohn. Like, that is how we save his life. That is how we save the FPA. And at most, we get Yang Wenli being like, like, so this Chung guy maybe knows what he's talking about. I'd like to meet him someday. And then just, that's it, right?
Right.
Like,
yeah,
we never...
yeah, I hear what you're saying, because, like, on the one hand, it's almost selfish to want him to live, because it would be cool to see what else, because he proved that he was an extremely capable person, right?
Right, like, and Yang was desperate for, like...
Good people.
Competent subordinate. Like, imagine a Chung who is at Iserlohn, like, there to support
Right.
Julian after Yang dies, right?
Yeah.
Like,
On the other hand, it just thematically worked so much better.
oh, it's thematically perfect, right? Like, it's as Bucock says, like, or it's as Chung, it's more as Chung says, because Bucock initially wants to send Chung, Chung
Right.
away. But Chung is like, nah, we're like the old, like, we're the old generations, we're the old dogs, like, we have to die to usher in, you know, make room for the next generation. But I'm like, Chung, you're not that
Right.
old. Like, you're not
He's like
Bucock
my age
old.
or something.
You're not,
right?
right? Like, Bucock is, like, struggling to get up with his cane old. Like, it's sad and tragic. Chung,
That
you're
scene
like,
was really good.
it's really good. Also one of the greatest. A lot of the top 5 scenes of Legend of the Galactic Heroes could be attributed to Alexander Bucock. But honestly,
Chung is like, I might have tennis elbow old, or my joints hurt a little bit, but yeah.
yeah, like Chung, you're as old as my mom or something. Like you're not like you're
Right.
middle aged, but you're not like that old. Like Julian could have really benefited from your advice, especially after Murai leaves.
I also thought Chung dying was kind of thematically appropriate in the, like, how many competent, capable people did the FPA waste?
Right.
Right.
In somewhat contrast, I guess, to the Empire with Reinhardt, trying to find all the best people,
Scooping up everyone. Yeah.
Yeah, like it definitely. I mean, like to kind of, it's how do I put this? Yeah, like in many ways, the FPA is like it is a tragic comedy of errors, right? Like they have all the pieces to save themselves. Hell, they have all the pieces to destroy the Empire,
right?
and they just throw them all away. And like, sure, you could throw some of this at the feet of Job Trunicht, but people voted him in. The council voted him in. Like, it is a failing of the FPA as a whole that like it was never about who's better or who has the better people. It was about how they use them, and like that is where Reinhardt wins handily over the FPA.
Right.
Like, it's just a shame we did not get to see some more of that old guard stick around to help out,
Definitely.
towards the end. Like, Julian, I think, did the best he could with the hand he was dealt.
Mm-hmm.
Like, obviously Shenkop and Poplin and
Dusty.
Kazalnu and Dusty were all there to give the best advice they could, but Julian could have used a lot more cards in his hand. I'll leave it at that.
Indeed.
One more minor retcon that I don't actually believe would help the show, but would make me satisfied. I wish events had conspired in such a way that... And because I feel like we have not invoked his name often enough in this podcast...
Uh-huh.
I
Lay
wish...
it on us, man.
I know what you're going to say now.
I wish Bitfield had hit Oberstein a few more times.
Okay.
Like, tackling him is not good enough for me. I wish Bitfield had got some swings in.
I thought you were going to say we got more Meckling.
Oh, yes, Mecklinger too, of course. Of course, more Mecklinger. But really what makes me sad is that Bitfield tackles Oberstein to the ground, and he gets restrained before he even gets a swing in. I'm not saying kills Oberstein. I'm saying...
Bloodies him a little.
Yeah, like give him a black eye or
we never got
something. Break his collarbone.
Oberstein gets flapped moment.
Yeah.
That could have been it.
Even in death, he kept his cool, which...
That's true.
But yes, more Mecklinger moments, yes. I mean, of course. That goes without saying. We have not invoked his name in this
He
podcast.
was making up for lost time
he got
toward
his
the end.
dues in by the end.
Angry Principal Mecklinger.
He was hustling towards the end, but it's just not enough.
All right.
But I think with that, do we still want to do this?
This shouldn't take too long. We'll go fast.
Okay, fine.
I've got our list here.
I'm almost
Yes.
gonna have to exclude myself out of this one because it's not gonna happen. But
Iro, do you want to introduce this one?
For our fun, goofy topic, I wrote down here, can you remember their full names? How many characters in the show do you remember their
This
first
is gonna
and
go
last
pretty bad.
names?
Okay. So, do you
Alright.
want to just list off the
Yep,
names
I'm
we
just
know
gonna
them
go
by?
down. We'll make this quick. Reinhardt.
Von Lohengram.
Okay, what was he known before
Von
Von
Musel,
Lohengram?
Von Musel.
Okay, Kirky Eyes.
Siegfried.
Yeah, Siegfried Kirkias.
What about Royenthal?
Oscar Von Royenthal?
Yes, Oscar
Uh-huh,
von
okay.
Rosenthal. Yeah,
Mittermeier?
that's right.
Well, that dude's name is fucking Wolfgang Mittermeier.
you know what? I have to say, I was the first thing I thought in my brain was Ferdinand because of Fire Emblem.
Oh, because of Fire Emblem.
Ferdinand von Eyre.
I could have believed his first name was
But that was
Ferdinand too.
Okay,
Fire
Oberst-
Emblem thing.
Okay, Oberstein.
That's a hard
Paul?
one.
Oh, wow. Paul? Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah, Paul.
Paul von Oberstein.
Right, he has like the most fucking
Paul Oberstein.
Paul Oberstein.
yeah, it sounds like you should own a
down the
grocery store or
street.
something. Paul Oberstein.
Yeah.
All right, Braunschweig.
Ooh. Wow. Okay. Braunschweig.
I got nothing on this one.
Damn.
right.
Give me a second.
We gotta keep moving.
Fine. Wilmot.
No. It's Otto von Braunschweig.
Oh, fine. I should have guessed that.
Okay, Mueller.
Shit.
I'm getting to the hard ones now.
Silver
Can you get
Shield
first
Mueller.
letter?
And
Neidhart.
yep. All right. Yep.
That's all I needed.
There you go. You needed a hint. Okay,
Yeah.
Bittenfeld.
How do I not know Bittenfield's name?
Fuck.
Your best friend, Bittenfeld.
I love Bitfield, but
I've
also
never heard his first name. I swear they never said it.
He's like Kirky Eyes, where it's
Right.
like you just call him
Or
Bittenfield.
I mean,
I don't know, Lionel.
He is Fritz Josef.
I'm pretty
Bittenfeld.
sure
think
they've
that's why they
never
call
said
it
that on the show.
I think they actually have, but
It's
Right.
probably been in the subtitles or whatever.
yeah, fine, Fritz.
Fahrenheit.
Adrian?
No. You got the A right.
Adalbert.
Adalbert von Fahrenheit.
Adalbert? Jeez, okay.
Okay, Mecklinger. We know
Yes,
Mecklinger.
Ernest
Yeah,
Mecklinger.
Ernest.
Yeah. What about Eisenach?
Oh boy, Eisenach. They showed his first name in a couple of the title cards.
See, we didn't get title cards in the official.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Oh.
God, you guys, how did you guys even keep up with the
Yeah.
characters?
Oh, you guys got screwed.
I mean, don't you
Jesus.
remember how much we struggled with the first season thing?
Yeah.
I mean, look,
yeah.
that was
Yeah,
the first
me and
season.
Marlon are
Without the
handicapped
title
on this
cards. Yeah, without the title cards,
Fair,
I never
fair.
would have remembered. I can't.
All right, Ernest von Eisenach.
Wait,
Really? He has the same first name
I
as
mean, I guess the
Mecklinger?
mathematical odds of two of them having the same
I
first
mean,
name
right,
are
like
pretty
it's
high.
like in real life that's common. I feel like in fiction, one of like the unspoken
Right.
rules,
Yeah.
two dudes never have the
but
first
that's what I'm
same
saying, man.
name.
They're trying to make it feel like
Yeah.
nonfiction.
Oh man, I can't believe we never got a bit about Mecklinger and Eisenach. It's just somebody calling it, "Hey, Ernest," and both of them turning
Just,
around.
too many German
what a
guys.
waste.
You know, not enough German names to go around.
Fair. What about Lutz?
Lutz. Oh
Yeah,
boy,
we're too deep now.
I can't. I can't.
I'm cheating. I have the list in front of me. This is easy. I don't know what you guys are having
Aaron.
problem with.
all right, fine. What is his name?
We got Cornelius Lutz.
Cornelius.
Right, Cornelius. Yes. Now that if you had said C, I think I would have picked up on it. But yeah,
Kempf.
Gustav. Yeah. Wait, no.
Gustav Kempf.
Oh.
Carl Gustav Kempf. So you know that counts. You got
All right.
one.
I just remember because Kempf is like to Fahrenheit or Mueller is like, hey, maybe after this they'll call it the
Right.
Right.
Right,
Mueller
like-
Kempf corridor.
right. Yes, I forgot if you said Gustav Kempf corridor, but
Lenin Kampf.
fuck. Is it Joseph?
This is because he looks like
Because
Stalin.
he kind of looks like Stalin. I got nothing.
Helmut Lennekamp.
Oh,
That's
man.
equally as
He's Helmut.
stereotypical. God.
Hang out with Helmut Kruger or about Valen.
Valen. Was he Joseph?
No.
I don't know why I keep saying Joseph.
One of them's got to be Joseph.
First letter.
He's got two names. He's got two names as
Oh,
well.
come on.
S is what you'll probably remember.
Oh, S? The only S I know is Siegfried.
All right.
Steve.
He is August Samuel Valen.
August Samuel.
I would not have picked up on that.
Yeah.
Kessler.
Ooh, Kessler. I feel like it's like at the tip of my tongue.
I feel like I should know, but Matthew?
Ulrich Kessler.
Ulrich,
yeah.
right? His fucking first name is so weird. Yeah.
All right.
We're not doing so good at these anymore.
Let's move on to FPA. Skip some of these less important dudes. Okay, we Yang Wenli. We know Yang Wenli.
Uh-huh.
Julian
Menchie.
Julian.
Yeah.
Frederica
Greenhill, come on.
Greenhill Young.
Oh,
Well,
yeah.
come yes,
I know, I'm
yes.
kidding.
Fair.
Kazelnu's first
Mrs.
name.
Young.
Kazlanu's
What'd you
first
say?
name.
Kazerne. Yeah.
Kaznu's first name is Oh shit.
Frig.
Honestly, this might even be harder because they have more like normal names, like more anglicized names. I don't know, David.
Alexander.
Okay.
Wait, he's what? Again, they're sharing the same first. You can't do that. That's
why they're all known by their last names.
And so yeah, by extension, if we know Bukak.
Right.
yeah.
Okay, what about his wife, Kazunu's wife?
Oh god, I feel terrible. I can never remember the name of
Something with H?
Oh, Hortense.
Hortense.
There we go.
Yes, Hortense. Okay,
Yeah.
what about his eldest daughter?
Ah shit.
Oh, we're going real deep, huh?
Yeah. Well, no, I mean they're around a lot.
I don't know, Henrietta.
Charlotte Phyllis Kazner.
Right, Charlotte. He's because Julie.
Okay, what about the youngest daughter?
Oh,
You're killing
you
us.
really think we're gonna know her?
She has no name given.
What?
What? Trick question? No name given?
What?
Are you?
What?
You're talking about a show which will name fucking Schneider or something? Fucking, but what's his name? What's the name of the bungling poet?
Landsberg. Is that
Landsberg?
Landsberg or is that?
I think that's Landsberg.
Keep getting the names.
Either way.
Yeah, I keep getting Landsberg and
one kid and not
whatever.
the other.
She's like
That's
3 years old.
That's
Okay.
hilarious. What's the next one?
Okay, Dusty, we know Dusty.
Yeah, Dusty.
Yeah.
Well, Shenkop.
Wait. I gotta go back. So Dusty is actually his real legal name, not
Yes.
a nickname.
Yes.
Man, that's
Yeah, some parents are
damn
like that.
Dusty.
Apparently, I read somewhere there's an explanation for that in the Gaiden somewhere.
Really? I'm looking forward to seeing it then.
Shenkop.
Walter.
William?
Walter
Walter
Schenkopp.
Walter
von
von
Schenkopp,
Schenkopp, right.
yeah.
Okay. About Admiral Sutole.
Shit.
Was it? Is it a name we know? Is it a common
Beekeeper.
name?
BQ. Sidney Sutole.
Sydney. Okay.
Sidney Siddeley, right, the all alliteration.
Okay. What about Merkat's his full
Okay,
name?
I only know this one because I looked at in preparation I looked him up and it's Willibald.
Oh, she cheated.
yeah. No, in preparation for because I was trying to remember something he did.
Oh, sure.
Is he William?
No, Willibald. It's really weird.
getting there.
Willibald.
Willibald Joachim von Merkat.
Right, Joaquin,
yes,
right,
I
fucking...
remember that.
Well, Joaquin.
God.
Right?
Also, he's the first named character who shows up and who's on screen.
I mean, again, we say it time and time again, man, Merkatz is one of the most first named characters to show up in episode 1. Dude fucking hangs there until literally, the penultimate episode.
Yeah.
Okay. Poplin's first name?
Olivier.
Olivier. Or Olivier.
Olivier, yeah. Okay, what about Admiral Murai?
Shit. Oh, man, I never fucking... Ugh.
Yeah, I got nothing.
Not given. He's just Murai.
What?
Not even a manual or something?
Really? Just... Oh...
He's just Murai. He's got one name.
Is it similar for fucking Poplin?
The-
I mean, not Poplin, Patriciv?
The
No,
chief of staff
Patrick
formerly
has
known
first
as
name.
Mirai.
Wait, so Patriciv gets a first name, but Mirai
I will
doesn't?
say also Bagdashu as a single name.
Well,
also.
that makes sense.
What?
That makes sense.
Okay.
What, is that his code name? It's not his real name?
Codename
Is it-
Bagdashu.
Codename Bagdashu?
Patrichev is Fyodor Patrichev.
Right.
Never would have guessed that one.
Okay. That's pretty much everyone else. I mean, we know Kateros,
Yeah.
Karen. We know Mashengo's first name,
Louis Mashengo, Strength of 10 Men.
and then
Job
we've been
Trunick.
over Alexander Bukak. Yeah. Job
Yeah.
Trunick, yeah.
Okay. You know...
Rubinsky.
There's the
Yeah,
Adrian.
Adrian
Okay,
Rubinsky.
that's why, yes.
All
Adrian
right.
Rubinsky. Yes.
And just as a bonus here, none of us will get this. We have Enrique Martino Borges de Arantes e Oliveira.
Oh,
That's right. He has
yes,
the,
him
the
and his
super
fucking 6
Hispanic
names.
name.
Asshole.
All right.
Oh, well-
That went badly.
Look, yeah, I mean, look, if to all our lovely listeners out there, if you ever, I apologize if we ever made claims we were the Legend of the Galactic Heroes super fans. You know,
How can you
we
call
ma-
yourself a super fan if you can't even remember the name of Kazunu's daughter?
we make up for it in enthusiasm where we lack in encyclopedic knowledge.
Right.
How could you forget Willibald Joachim von Merkat?
My
Well,
bad.
okay, I did.
Okay,
Before
yeah.
today.
How could you forget Enrique Martino Borges de Arantes e Oliveira?
That was never gonna happen. I
should
feel like I
hold our
should have
man
remembered more of the admirals, but
Well,
just
hold our manhood
Edwin
cheap.
Fisher. Shout out to Edwin Fisher.
okay. That's the other thing I would have wanted to see. I say it every time. I think I've
Yes,
said this 3
put them
podcasts
putting
in a
down the
row.
coup or
I
whatever.
want to see the episode where Fisher, Mirai, and Patrushev work together to put down a
Right.
mutiny, which is like because like I don't think of any 3 of them as like particularly physical. Like Patrushev's big, but he's not like he's not a fighter in the way that Shenkai
He's not like
is.
a Trudeau
Right.
Right, so it's like I want to be like, how do those 3 work together to put down a mutiny? Like, does Mirai just shout them into complacency? Like, he just scold them until they give
Mirai
up?
reveals a sonic scream ability.
Like, Edwin Fisher has so few spoken lines. Like, does he just like look at them disapprovingly?
He just pulls Valen and
Like,
stares them
Just
down.
organizes their revolt very efficiently
Right.
until
He just-
the point
yeah,
where
he
they're
just-
like, oh wait, maybe we should.
right? Maybe see that's the thing. I need to see that episode. Maybe the trick is that Fisher pretends to join the mutiny, but then he organizes the mutiny so well they just become part of the regular forces again.
Like here's the list. Everyone just join the meeting. It's just it's just the entire rest of the fleet.
It's just the rest of the fleet.
And we've all voted that these people are in charge. Oh, it's just the same as before.
Right. Like, as a proper mutiny, we should put these people in charge, and we should report to young Wenli. And the rest of the mutiny's like, yeah, that's a great idea. Oh, Fisher, he always knows what to do.
They ended the mutiny. They didn't even realize that. They didn't even realize. They think
And,
they're in
like-
charge.
Right, and, like, Mirai's just there to be, like, the bad cop. Like, oh, yeah, you gotta pledge loyalty to Yang Wenli to mutiny against Mirai. And everyone's like, yeah, that makes sense. Oh, see, this is why we should have had that episode.
Yeah.
All right. With that said,
We need to
of course, I
wrap up here.
think it is fitting we end our gigantic Legend of the Galactic Heroes podcasts on a tangent about Edwin Fisher.
Of course.
I think with all that said and done,
Yeah.
I think it is time for us to start to close up on this podcast. But
Yeah.
of course, before that, I think we would all like to offer our sincerest thanks to all of you who have listened to us ramble and rant about this show
Yes.
for the last, like, almost 2 years. It's all that we have read all the comments that you have left for us. We don't always have the time or, frankly, the energy or intelligence to reply to your very long replies, but honestly, that's almost because we feel it would be inadequate to reply to such in-depth write-ups with a couple sentences, But believe me, it is deeply flattering to think that I don't think it's just on the back of our discussion, but our discussion about the show is enough to elicit those reactions. It's been really cool. It's been really flattering to see and watch you guys kind of react and accompany us on this journey. It's been unreal, and for that, once again, I just want to offer my sincerest thanks. And we joke about doing the Gaiden series. I gotta be honest, I don't know when that's coming. Like, I wish I could be like tune in, later this year, but it really just kind of hinges on our schedules and when we feel the time is right. But if the time ever does come, I sincerely hope you guys will be there for the ride again. I think with that, I want to say that also offer my thanks to the rest of you guys. Jell, Marlon, as always, thank you for coming onto these podcasts when you do.
Thanks for introducing us.
It's always a hoot to have you guys on board.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, Marlon. I think I just talked over you.
Yeah, thank you for introducing us to this show. As much as I was talking about earlier, I really do cherish this show. I think it's something special.
Yeah, and thank you guys for just being. You guys really dove into this, and you were so consistent with it.
Right.
And even when we were making fun of you in the beginning, and you guys did a great job breaking stuff down every week. The format worked out really well.
Right.
It was really fun watching it, and I like Marlon said, we were like very much compelled to watch it after hearing you guys, and I'm so glad that we did. So thank you guys too.
I'm glad to hear that, honestly. I guess in a weird ways, Marlon, Jell, you two are technically the first two people that
with the first comments.
Yes.
right that Iro and I ever convinced to watch the show. So,
Yeah.
you know,
That's true.
Come meet me in my cave under the Himalayas. It'll be great.
It's been great, and of course, I saved the best for last. Iro, my companion, my navigator, my traveling companion. I think I said a lot of this already in our last podcast, but again, I want to thank you for coming along.
Of course.
I want to thank you for that time when you just like spontaneously threw what My Conquest is the Sea of Stars on your TV while we were hanging out. And that day we just decided, you know what? Yeah, let's just watch this. Like, let's just see where this takes us. And yeah, you know, I don't think I would watch this show without you. Like, I think we had to do this as a cooperative thing. I couldn't see it any other way.
Thanks for having me on the podcast.
Of course. And next time, whatever podcast we decide to host on the horizon, you are the first of the bannermen I will ask to join me. You are my shout.
I'm tiring after this. I'm tired of the military life.
Sure.
Gotta collect my pension.
Yeah, well, I don't know if you can rest quite yet. To hint at maybe what we may watch on the horizon, you are my Xiao Hao Dun to my Cao Cao.
That's what they always say.
Christ.
You know, to my noted Renaissance man, Cao Cao. Look, I'm just saying, if anybody has watched that live-action Romance of the Three Kingdoms show and has anything to say about it, I'd be curious to know. I'm curious. I'm curious is all.
I want in on that if it happens.
But I think finally, with all of that said, we're going to finally end this very long podcast that is roughly double the length of what we thought it might be. Okay, here goes.
That's Galactic Heroes, baby.
Yeah, so, as always, you can listen to this podcast and read our content on theglorioblog.com. You can follow us on Twitter at theglorioblog. You can listen to our sister podcast, the GLORIO Chat, where we talk about more recently airing anime, as well as a couple of other sister podcasts that are... Actually, what is going on with Glorious King of the Kaiju? I keep... Has that got another...
Good question.
Got another one in the can? I'm not sure. Well, we'll see.
I think there were some copyright issues with the last episode.
We're always thinking of new podcast ideas, so stay tuned. Keep an eye on that, of course. As always,
Akuguys has started a feature where he goes through all of the Ghibli films in chronological order.
That is an interesting. Okay, I was not aware of that. Yeah, kind of like our pilgrimage to Mecca, or this own rewatch of Legend of the Galactic Heroes. I think a post about the Ghibli movies that. Honestly, that sounds pretty interesting. I'm not even saying that to shill. As somebody who has not read a single post or have little just heard about it now, I'd say that sounds interesting. So, yeah, that will probably be out and about by the time this podcast is out anyway. So, certainly check that out. Mm-hmm. As always, you can watch Legend of the Galactic Heroes on High Dive and maybe VRV.
I confirmed, yes.
Oh, good, thank God.
Right,
we did
so
not.
You've been right this whole time.
We did not lie to our viewers this whole time.
For $9.99 a month.
So, I think with all that, once again, thank you all for coming along on this journey. For one final time, we will see you amongst the Sea of Stars.
I don't know the whole thing. I'm sorry.
Oh,
I've
shit.
actually had a tab for like months written for this.
I don't think we subject our listeners to this any further.